Number 10. Phage. Phage first appeared in Venom Lethal Protector number 4, which was a 6-issue miniseries from 1993, but he wasn't named until 2012 in Carnage USA number 2. Phage is one of 5 symbiotes forcefully bred out of Venom. The siblings are Agony, Riot, Lasher, and Scream. The Phage would later combine with 3 of its siblings, Riot, Lasher, and Agony, to form the better known Hybrid symbiote. So from then on we're dealing with Hybrid and Hybrid's bondings. This all came about because of the success of the first Venom offspring, Carnage, and while people always want to repeat success. However, few of the symbiote offshoots have proved as popular or long-lasting as Carnage. Carnage first debuted in The Amazing Spider-Man number 361 in 1992. That was as a full appearance. Like Venom before him, he had had a cameo appearance the issue prior. And also like Venom before him, his host, Cletus Cassidy, had been pre-established. All factors on top of his design and absolute bloodlust that made him much more memorable of a character than Phage to most. Still, Marvel has been riding the more and more symbiotes ride ever since, and just look at what they've got Kate's doing with absolute carnage. Number 9. Ruin Venom. Runes, depends how you want to say it. This symbiote comes to us from Ruin vs. Venom number 1 in 1995, and has direct connection to Planet of the Symbiotes, which was a 5-issue event from 1995, and actually had to do with the fallout over the creation of the 5 forcefully bred symbiotes we just talked about. Also, the planet in question is Earth, don't get excited. Ruins is a murder mystery, which I'm about to ruin, so heads up. Ruin Venom involves a symbiote that survived the seeming death of all invading symbiotes from the planet arc, and bonds to Ruin. So, who is Ruin? Well, Ruin was an extreme vampire-like creature created in the 90s who debuted in Sludge number 1. He begins framing Venom for murders around town by writing Venom in huge letters next to the victim. Copying Carnage much? Of course the media falls for it. However, Ruin Venom runs into some problems, not only when real Venom comes to investigate, but also when Ruin begins to suspect some of his actions are being influenced. Ruin. Number 8. Coroba. Coroba first debuted in Venom Seed of Darkness number 1 in 1997. Are you picking up on just how much Venom stuff was going on in the 90s? There was no escape. If you didn't like Venom, Godspeed. Side note, Coroba's heading on the cover is The Living Darkness, and inside the book, he's called The Abyss That Walked. Pretty neat. So this is supposed to be a story that occurs before the current timeline, well, the then current timeline. Marvel will do this sometimes when they have a tale that really won't slot anywhere but isn't strong enough for a what if, or they're going through a period where they're not publishing what ifs. It's a pretty simple story. Coroba bonds with a scientist, Dr. Don Levy. It tells him that it will help maintain knowledge, you know, the usual, but it tricks him. It's up to Eddie Brock to defeat him. I'm kidding, Eddie isn't Venom. In this story, he's still a not as good as Peter Parker photographer, so he observes and ponders on the nature of man and monster. This one is less hard to understand and more easy to miss. Number 7. Zzzxx. Yes, I said Zed. It's Canada up here. This is a more recent addition who debuted in X-Men Kingbreaker number 2 in 2009. This symbiote is a Clintar and a mutant, and it eats brains. It was discovered by the Shi'ar. The most interesting thing about this symbiote, aside from its rather random letter-centric name, is how it was weaponized against the Charles Xavier from the Cancerverse, which was a realm introduced in the Realm of Kings crossover comic 2010, a universe ruled by evil organic masses. So the Xavier in this universe was a planet-sized brain, and for a brain eater like Zzzxx, a match made in heaven. This could really have hit the zombie element harder with the symbiote, but I mean, they have Marvel Zombies for that. Number 6. Mania. Mania first debuted in Venom number 1 in 2003. This symbiote is a clone of Venom, which given Marvel's history with dragging out perfectly good clone sagas until the entire creative staff behind them is permanently traumatized, I'm amazed a direct clone like this hadn't happened sooner. Also, it was only named Mania in 2011 when Venom relaunched. So this clone was created using a piece of Venom's tongue, which is hardly surprising. That tongue is everywhere. From the start, the symbiote was sadistic, refusing to bond with awkward hosts, instead torturing and killing them, sometimes by pulling up the worst fears from their memories and then acting on those. The thing with Mania is that it's hard to track, because a bunch of things that happen, such as it being reabsorbed into Eddie's symbiote, are no longer considered canon. Now Mania is just kind of of around and brought out when necessary, but since Kate's and the ridiculous amount of symbiotes he's been creating, we'll see how some of these other symbiotes fare.
Number 5. Toxin. As its name implies, Toxin has the unique power of toxic fangs. While Venom itself seems to sometimes be able to produce acid, these toxic fangs and the toxic bite that it comes with seem to be a power that doesn't really come much from anywhere specific that makes sense. Symbiotes obviously possess their own power set due to their unique physiology, but when we were originally introduced to symbiotes, it was implied that unique abilities were actually cloned from those that they had bonded with previously, making Toxin's bite kind of an odd one, because where does it come from? But then again, many of the other symbiotes have also appeared to have unique abilities, so maybe this is just a thing and we just learned about it later, and so symbiotes can be born with, or I guess develop, unique abilities just all on their own? And you might be thinking, like, maybe it does come from one of Toxin's parents, or Toxin's parent symbiote, but his parent symbiote was Carnage, so I don't know. What is that? Number 4, Carnage. Speaking of Carnage, I mean, the longer a character's history, the greater the chance that things might get pretty out there for the character. Like when Carnage and Venom randomly displayed the ability to travel through the internet in the 90s. But one of the other crazier abilities we've seen is the ability for Carnage to control another person's mind. And I'm not just talking about the usual back and forth bonding here between symbiote and host, though I feel like Cletus and a symbiote, when we're talking about Carnage, are really a combo team. No one is really vying for control. The decisions they actually make together, and those decisions are both equal parts theirs. Whereas Venom has always said, "We are Venom," implying some independence between Brock and his symbiote, Carnage always refers to itself as one single entity, fully merged. I am Carnage. What I'm talking about here is what we've seen with Carnage both in Volume 1 and later in Volume 2, when it recovered these powers, exhibiting the ability to control or influence others' minds. It almost completely took control of Stark's mind and suit in Carnage Volume 1, Issue 5, which we've seen other symbiotes do this, but it's not a power you see very often. Where does it come from? Why does it exist? Because it comes from Null? Number 3, Sleeper. Another symbiote that possesses unusual chemical-related powers is Sleeper. Sleeper is another offspring of Venom. It was left in the care of Alchemax by its parent, Venom, and their partner, Eddie Brock, who helped in a way to give birth to Sleeper, I guess you could say, making Eddie Brock, I guess, kinda like a parent to Sleeper too, although not genetically speaking per se. Even Alchemax was surprised when Sleeper seemed to develop all its own, a power of chemokinesis. It can create and secrete chemicals for a variety of purposes. It can use this ability to propel itself through space, manipulate the emotions of others, cloak its scent, control minds, and even to neutralize and attack enemies. Number 2, Anti-Venom. This is a pretty strange symbiote, even in just how it came to be. Anti-Venom is a symbiote that was created when Martin Lee, aka Mr. Negative, used his powers to cure Eddie Brock's cancer. But for some reason, his power bonded with the remnants of Venom that still lingered within Brock and created a new symbiote known as Anti-Venom. Being that this symbiote was created in such an odd way, some unique abilities made sense. It had been created after bonding with Eddie's white blood cells, so of course it had immense healing and cleansing powers. But it also for some reason had immunity to the usual weaknesses of a symbiote. It was immune to fire and sonic attacks for some reason, and this was never really fully explained, and just chalked up to it being an extremely different kind of symbiote. So there's still a lot that I feel like we didn't really figure out about Anti-Venom before it went poof, bye. Number 1, Venom. Venom has displayed countless abilities over the years and has changed as time has changed along with it. It has been revealed to be able to merge with inorganic material, giving us briefly a Venommobile for a bit when it was also bonded with a host at the same time. The Venom symbiote actually can seemingly bond to anything, including a dinosaur in the Old Man Logan universe. It's learned how to grow wings, has immunity to Ghost Rider's penance stare for some reason, maybe because it was once bonded with Ghost Rider, has access to a pocket dimension, can camouflage itself, and can travel through telephone lines and also travel through the internet. But one of the strangest powers was revealed during the time it spent with Flash Thompson as Agent Venom in outer space during the Space Knight series. At that point, it was revealed that after being cleansed, well, partially cleansed really, as it would later turn out, it could hear the voice of the universe, which gave it kind of like a galactic SOS radar, allowing Venom to sense when planets were in danger. Yeah, entire planets. Probably one of the most out there powers that we have seen it display. Spacey powers are always so weird and out there. They're great. Are you guys a fan of Space Knight? Let me know in the comments.
And at number 10, Mogo. Hailing from the DC universe, Mogo is a sentient planet adrift in space, doing his best to look awesome and not do much else. Oh, and did I mention that he's also a part of the Green Lantern Corps? The Green Lanterns will literally hire anybody these days, even an immovable planet. Aside from being able to create constructs with his power ring, Mogo is also able to create holograms on his surface to simulate whatever he wants. How is this explained? Well, he's a giant superpowered planet who's also a space cop. Does it need any more explanation than that? And at number 9, Big Bertha. Ashley Crawford is a mutant who is able to control the fat distribution throughout her entire body. So during the day, she's one of the most beautiful supermodels the world has ever seen. But when trouble arises, she becomes Big Bertha, a really fat superhero with super strength. Now, I understand the concept of being able to redistribute your body mass to make yourself bulkier and, more or less an immovable object, but where does the super strength come in? How does adding more mass onto her legs allow her to jump further, like it does in the comics? Wouldn't it be the opposite? Her powers are strictly defined as fat manipulation, so muscle shouldn't be involved in this at all. I'm so confused, Marvel. Why would you do this? Is she just like the female Blob? I need to know. And at number 8, Ambush Bug. First appearing in DC Comics Presents number 52, Ambush Bug was initially presented as a villain to Superman and the Doom Patrol. He appeared as a self-centered villain who wore a skin-tight green suit, which made him look more or less like a bug. Any and all powers he had were just devices he had hidden away in his suit somewhere. Ambush Bug was so popular, however, that he was brought back more and more until eventually they transitioned him from being a villain into a third-wall-breaking hero, very akin to Deadpool. His appearances in comics nowadays are very sporadic and get weirder and weirder every time, and his powers are pretty much whatever the writers want them to be.
Number 7, Lasher. What's weird about this one is Lasher actually exhibits a less refined version of a power that the Venom symbiote attempted to exert earlier on. Okay, so I'm not going to lie, this one is just as interesting as it is strange in terms of symbiote history, which is kind of why I selfishly wanted to share it with you guys on this list. But it is additionally and also fairly outlandish and odd power, so it also belongs here as well. Lasher is a forced offspring of Venom, whose creation was manipulated by the government and the Life Foundation. Lasher's weird power as a result of that is that it can bond with 2 hosts, though one host needs to be less sentient or non-sentient in order for it to work. This is interesting because it is originally a power that Venom attempted to flex when it sought to bond with both Peter Parker and Eddie Brock at the same time. A symbiote threesome of sorts, you might say. However, it didn't work and caused Venom to pass out from exhaustion just for trying it. The other weird thing about this enhanced ability for Lasher is out of all of the things the government could work to improve, this seems like kind of a weird one to pick. All it grants the symbiote is additional control over a war dog ultimately, which is cool, but it doesn't seem like a huge advantage in comparison to, say, trying to cure one of its natural weaknesses, which would be better. Like, now it's not weak to fire or something like that. Number 6, Scorn. Scorn is the offspring of Carnage and Tannis Knives' prosthetic arm, because apparently that's a thing that can happen. As such, it has unique technological abilities, being part tech, part symbiote. It can fuse and interact with tech and seems to have a level of immunity when it comes to the usual sonic weaknesses that most symbiotes suffer from. What a weird symbiote, though. A weird origin.
Up next in our number 5 spot, Rogue. Rogue may be one of the more prominent heroic members of the X-Men, but once upon a time she was a villain. Or at least debuted as such. After her mutant powers manifested, she was tracked down by Mystique, who at the time was dating the precognitive character Destiny, who had advised her to look for Rogue. Chris Claremont had initially intended to have Mystique be Rogue's real mother, FYI. Anywho, Rogue joined up with the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Over the years, the character has been in a slew of different romantic relationships that often left fans scratching their heads, mainly because they either occur on alternate Earths, but are talked about so much that fans confuse what's canon, or because all of a sudden Rogue can touch someone that she couldn't touch before and now they're knocking boots because of it. Case in point, Colossus. In X-Men issue 100, Rogue discovers that she can touch him, so naturally they make out, which leads to a relationship. This caused quite the stir since in the past Colossus was actually affected by her powers. Now let's take a look at Age of Apocalypse. She was married to Magneto and had kids with him after ditching Gambit. People freaked out over it. In the main 616 universe, she was retconned to have been in a relationship with Sentry when it was revealed that he existed. In the 2013 Age of Ultron event, which had nothing to do with the MCU film might I add, she was married to Havoc and they led the Morlocks. And you know what else is confusing about Rogue? The number of times she's absorbed a power that is so immense that it eventually gets retconned. It happened in House of M when she absorbed Genisvel's cosmic powers. Up next, number 4, Fire. Fire, aka Beatrice DaCosta, first appeared in Super Friends issue 25 back in 1979. She lands a spot on this list for two specific reasons. First off, why is she green if she is fire? Second, and arguably more confusing, is she a queer character or not? Let's start with the former. Back when she first appeared in the comics, we're talking pre-Crisis on Infinite Earths, she was known as Green Fury. Her powers of green pyrokinesis were birthed from Brazilian mysticism, hence why her flames are green. She has the ability to become a being purely composed of living green fire, which is different than the Human Torch, whose flames are fiery plasma, or rather an aura of fire, two different things. Post-Crisis, Beatrice's name was changed to Green Flame, which she then changed yet again to Fire after joining up with the Justice League International team. Now, let's discuss the latter point of befuddlement. She had some serious romantic tension with Ice Maiden, a character who replaced Ice, who was Fire's best pal and teammate on the Justice League after Ice was killed. Fire and Ice, get it, huh? Ice Maiden and her had an on and off again flirtation that seemed more like Beatrice was obsessed with Ice Maiden rather than it just being a reciprocated flirtation. There was also a whole series of panels in Justice League America issue 103 that queerbaited the crap out of the two of them, but then played it off as Ice Maiden just trying to give Beatrice ice back. Their story would carry on with them almost always getting intimate, one of them saying, "Is this what you want?" And then that want is just some sort of fake out queerbaiting. Eventually Ice Maiden would come out as bisexual, but Fire would remain lost in the ether of terrible queerbait. Moving on to number 3, Barbara Gordon. While DC's Barbara Gordon, aka Batgirl, doesn't seem like a perplexing character initially, there is one facet of her history that is arguably baffling. We're talking about how exactly the character lost her ability to walk, and how exactly she gained it back. Not only is that one of the most controversial aspects of her character, and one of the hot topics that arose during the start of the New 52 when she was revealed to have become mobile once again as Batgirl, but it also is something that can be a little confusing when you look at exactly how the whole situation unraveled. Barbara Gordon would become paralyzed from the waist down thanks to the actions of the Joker in The Killing Joke, a story that is technically not canon and occurs in an alternate universe, and makes Barbara a mere plot device. The story isn't about her, and her mutilation and assault is merely to advance Batman and Jim Gordon's stories and motivations. Writers Kim Yale and John Ostrander, after reading The Killing Joke, would end up working with DC to revive the character as disabled rather than have her fall into obscurity, thus creating the persona Oracle. The Killing Joke was written to not be canon and included some post-crisis characters that were no longer canon. Yet, it ended up becoming one of the most defining stories of Barbara's history, and since has been really wishy-washy in terms of not being canon and then becoming canon again. The whole thing, very confusing. But becoming Oracle did a lot of positive things for the character. She became more intelligent as writers relied on her other abilities that previously had been barely touched upon. Sure, she was a librarian, but often she was written as more of a stereotype, a woman who served a greater purpose to the male characters she supported narratively. It also provided representation as a handicapped character who was still out there fighting crime, making an impact as a superhero, which was really cool. Then, when she regained the ability to walk in the New 52, the character was said to have still suffered the events of The Killing Joke, something that remained canon despite being a story from an alternate universe originally. Barbara had undergone extreme physiotherapy and surgery, and her disability had only ailed her for 3 years rather than decades. All in all, it's a little hard to follow. Moving on to number 2, Emma Frost. Being a story. Emma Frost is a character who is known for using her sexuality to her advantage. While we're not going to get into the whole history behind her objectification in comics versus her ownership of and agency over that sexuality, that's a whole other number for a different list. What we will discuss is the nuances of her powers. For starters, Emma was once considered an Omega level mutant. That is no longer the case according to House of X issue 1, which left her out of the Omega count. Her powers mainly consist of 2 overarching abilities. She has immense telepathy telepathic powers and can transform her body into an organic diamond state that gives her enhanced strength and durability, but also suppresses her telepathy. This power manifested when Genosha was destroyed, and this form is self-sustaining, meaning she doesn't need food or water to survive in it. She is also numb to emotion, pain, and empathy while in this form. Now she has been both a villain and a hero, and has teamed up with the X-Men and led them once upon a time, but often is a confusing character in the sense that she's jumped back and forth with her allegiances over the years multiple times. And last but not least, in at number 1, Black Canary. Black Canary first appeared in 1947's Flash Comics issues 86, and is a clusterfuck of confusion. In the Golden Age, the character had the alter ego of Dina Drake, who went by the alias of Black Canary and fought alongside her husband, Detective Larry Lance. She didn't have superpowers. Rather, she was more of a vigilante who often posed as a criminal in order to infiltrate gangs. Later on, she was given a superpower called the Canary Cry, which was a high-powered sonic scream capable of incapacitating the likes of Superman. Seems straightforward, right? Haha, time for things to get messy. After the Golden Age, like the rest of DC's Golden Age heroes, Black Canary and her husband Larry were regulated to Earth 2. But in 1969, Larry was killed, and Dina decided that she was going to move to Earth 1 in the aftermath, where she joins the Justice League and then gets it on with Green Arrow. Weird. This is when she develops the Canary Cry. In the Silver Age, Black Canary then became two separate entities, Dina Drake Lance and Dina Laurel Lance, the former being the mother of the latter. The younger Black Canary became the focus in the comics, and she was the one who retained the metahuman Canary Cry ability. By the time the New 52 rolled around, those two characters were amalgamated into one, known as Dina Drake. In addition to that, if that wasn't confusing enough, her CW adaptations are also perplexing. There's multiple iterations: Dina Laura Lance, Sarah Lance, the White Canary, and Dina Drake, all portrayed by different actors. In at number 10, Danielle Moonstar. Danielle Moonstar is a confusing character, period. She's an individual who has been through multiple iterations of aliases, to the point where it's almost comical. Danielle Danny Moonstar first appeared in the New Mutants in 1982, and is a Cheyenne superhero who is generally associated with the X-Men. She was initially codenamed Psyche and later became Mirage, and her abilities history is a long one. Let's start with her mutant powers. She was a former empath who lost her abilities to communicate with animals and create three-dimensional images of visual concept within her mind and the minds of others. Like I said, she lost that. Generally, she could manifest people's fears or desires as realistic illusions. She lost those powers on M-Day and then regained them after being infected with the transmutant virus, but then was also cured of it by Dark Beast. See what I mean? It's already confusing. She briefly could make telepathic images manifest as psionic energy, allowing them to become tangible entities of solid psionic force, but that was limited. She would carry around a dream spear with her to destroy them when she was done with them. Unfortunately though, these powers would give her blinding headaches. Then, she became a Valkyrie, and was endowed with the Valkyrie power to perceive death. She would lose those powers though when Asgard fell, but then made a deal with Hela to get them back. And, in the past, she was capable of manipulating quantum energy. Moving on to number 9, Black Hood. When you hear the name Black Hood, a couple of different things may pop into your mind. For starters, it's a name that likely elicits a pulp character, mysterious and criminal perhaps in nature, a vigilante maybe. Now for those of you immersed in pop culture sensations, you might think of the CW TV series Riverdale and its mildly absurd Black Hood serial killer storyline. If you don't watch Riverdale, yes, that's a thing. Well, the Black Hood comic character actually has relations to that latter association, since he was a creation of Archie Comics. First appearing in Top Notch Comics issue 9 in 1940, he became rather popular, getting his own title called Black Hood Comics in 1943, which was a pulp magazine that ran for 11 issues before it was retitled and shifted its focus to being an all-humor title. During his time under Archie Comics, he was merely a great fighter and detective, but after the character was revived by DC's Impact Comics imprint in 1991, he gained a different set of powers, magically increased physical abilities and awareness. So what does that even mean? Well, we'll get to that in a sec, because here's where it gets even more befuddling. Impact had 3 Black Hoods. The first was a bitter vigilante who was killed off in their first issue of Black Hood. The second was a high school student who took over the hood but then abandoned it. And then the third was a former mobster who killed the first Black Hood. Whenever somebody wore the hood, they would get heightened awareness and increased strength, speed, and agility. The real kicker though? The hood was believed to be cursed, with each individual who wore it eventually succumbing to death, and the hood finding its way into the hands of a new individual who had the potential to take up the helm. Moving on to 8, the Thunderer. The Thunderer is a character who was published by Timely Comics in the Golden Age, the predecessor of Marvel. He's a dude whose superpower was high impact voice amplification. In other words, Dude shouted real loud. So let's backtrack here for a sec. Thunderer first appeared in 1941 in Daring Mystery Comics issue 7 and was a fellow named Jerry Carstairs, a radio operator frustrated that the US wasn't dealing with crime or Nazi saboteurs, so he took the law into his own hands. After learning of a Nazi infiltration operation that was abusing the radio station he worked at, he adopted the Thunderer persona, a costume with a built-in microphone, and took them down. He is capable of deafening people or leveling buildings with his sonic scream. Sure, you could call him a predecessor to Black Bolt's perhaps, on a creative level, but let's be real here. How exactly he was able to create a built-in microphone to do that in the 40s and level buildings is beyond me. Needless to say, he fell into obscurity, with one of his only claims to fame now being that he appeared in an animated Spider-Man series in an episode called Six Forgotten Warriors. At least his costume looked kinda cool though, you gotta give him that. And at 7, Jazz. If you thought Thunderer was a character who had a silly power, get ready to wrap your mind around Jazz. No, not the music, but the character. Jazz, whose real name is John Xander, is a blue-skinned mutant who wanted to be a rapper, but was not good at it. He became a drug runner instead, selling toad juice, which was a drug made from the secretions of another mutant. Gross. After M-Day, he was one of the few who retained his powers, and later, while trying to buy drugs, he was killed by Johnny D via a miniature voodoo doll. Needless to say, dude has a bit of a mockable storyline. So why is he confusing? Because he's a low-level mutant who doesn't actually have an ability. His mutation is that his skin is blue. That's it. I mean, maybe he could rap you to death with his mediocrity, but technically that is not a superpower. That's just a depressing character trait. And at 6, Kylun. There are plenty of animal-themed superheroes out there in the world of comics. Generally, their powers derive from their animal persona, as if they were some sort of anthropomorphic creature who had the abilities of said creature. We're not talking furries here, friends. Don't you dare make that joke in the comments. For example, take a look at Beast. Even Wolverine has similarities to his alias's namesake. But then, there is Kylun, who is slightly misleading. Sure, he looks like a cat creature of sorts, feline in nature, but that has no relation to his abilities. He's got claws and fangs which he can use in battle, but his true power is something unrelated. He can mimic sounds. Literally any sound that he hears, Kylun, aka Colin McKay, can replicate it thanks to his superpowered vocal cords. You weren't expecting that, were you? Moving on to number 5, Venom Hulk. Once upon a time, the Venom symbiote bonded with the Hulk, upgrading Bruce Banner from regular Hulk to one with all of Venom's abilities. That's scary, guys. While we don't get to see the full range of what this terrifying character can do, it still manages to go on a rampage and be a massive threat to multiple heroes. For context, this occurred in a story titled What If the Alien Costume Had Possessed Spider-Man in What If Volume 2 Issue 4. The hypothetical scenario in this one features Peter Parker not going to the Fantastic Four in time to have the symbiote removed from him, leading it to it hopping around possessing a bunch of Marvel heroes. It was a short-lived bond though. Venom would sense Thor's power after he had bonded with Hulk and then jump ship for the Asgardian instead. That's like kind of a diss. It's like I'd rather be in Thor. And at number 4, demonic abilities. Want demon powers? Just shack up in hell for a while and bam, you'll become orange and capable of all sorts of terrible things. Or at least that's what Infernal Hulk has taught us. Hailing from Earth 11638, Infernal Hulk has a fascinating story. Upon first glance, he is just the Hulk merged with the demon, and while that's not wrong, there's more to it than that. Bruce Banner of Earth 11638 is the Sorcerer Supreme. He casts a spell in which his Hulk half is separated from him and banished to the depths of hell, but it backfires because the Hulk goes down into hell and becomes more demonic, corrupted by the demons he encounters, gaining some of their powers and also turning orange, as one does in hell. He finds his way back up to Earth and wreaks havoc, with Bruce ultimately having to remerge them and then banish himself to hell with the Hulk in order to keep humanity safe. Moving on to number 3, different emotions, different Hulks. Here's a power that actually hails from the 616 universe. Did you know that different Hulks can manifest inside of Bruce Banner's psyche, and that based on their core emotion that they derive from, can have different power levels and different influence over Banner and the Hulk? Case in point, Kul. I don't know, it's Hulk spelled backwards. K-L-U-H. Let's go with Kul on this one. Kul is the manifestation of Bruce Banner's sadness rather than rage. These manifestations are rooted in different emotions, and they're actually aspects of Hulk's personality and not Banner's, giving him less control over them. All things considered, that is pretty rotten luck. Kul has more power than the regular Hulk, and when Hulk is really sad, this guy comes out to play. He's significantly stronger, larger, and has a set of claws that would leave anyone shivering in their boots. In addition to that, we've also seen other iterations of Hulk's personality in the past, including Guilt Hulk and Devil Hulk. Although Kul cool, managed to be its own independent entity, existing outside of Banner and Hulk's mind. Correct me in those comments, friends, please. And at number 2, Unipower. Once upon a time, the Hulk became Captain Universe. Now, Captain Universe is a physical manifestation of something called the Unipower, which possesses an individual when there is a crisis, filling them with the power they need in order to put an end to said crisis, making that individual one of the strongest beings in the entire universe. Now, the power is absolutely immense. Multiple different characters in the Marvel Universe have been endowed with the Unipower in the past, including our pal Bruce Banner in the comic Captain Universe: The Incredible Hulk. Captain Universe uses the Hulk to try to restore its memory and find a scientist named Gilbert Wiles. Hulk wields this power temporarily, making him capable of things like energy manipulation, matter manipulation, energy projection, you name it. He's borderline omnipotent in this form. Speaking of being omnipotent, in at number 1, the Power Cosmic. Yeah, the Hulk had that once. The Hulk of Earth 2149 has been endowed with the Power Cosmic. Impressive, right? But not because he's some herald of Galactus's. No, he's actually a zombie, and came about getting that power upgrade by a kind of taboo means. Earth 2149 is the Marvel zombie universe. In it, everyone gets infected with a zombie virus and ends up eating one another, having an insatiable hunger. Bruce Banner, aka the Hulk, is one of the worst of the worst. He, alongside other prominent zombified Marvel characters, end up devouring Galactus and Silver Surfer, and by eating them, they inherit the Power Cosmic. While one could argue that Galactus surely could take on a bunch of zombies, suspend your disbelief a little bit here. The Hulk becomes one of the zombie Galacti who ends up going around the galaxy in search of more food, pretty much obliterating all life in the process. All because he had a big old gigantic snack in the form of Galactus. Yikes.
Number 10. Null. While Null is more of the creator or father of all symbiotes, he's also kind of like the original symbiote in a way. As such, he has control over all symbiotes, sort of like his children, and he can manipulate them to do whatever he wants. Which, sure, Null is all-powerful, but also still a pretty weird bit of history that we discovered as we learned more and more about the bizarre and gloriously strange story of Clintar. His abilities include allowing him to turn all of his symbiotes, all of Clintar, into a space dragon. Yep. Don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining, just acknowledging how amazingly spacey and strange he is. He also managed to use his symbiotes to merge with the Silver Surfer for a brief moment, likely plotting to use the Silver Surfer as his very own symbiote herald. Oh man, Null definitely needs some symbiote heralds. That is a story I would read the heck out of. Number 9. Agony. Agony is the forced offspring of Venom, who was also modified by the Life Foundation. While Venom has been known to have somewhat acidic powers, Agony took this ability one bizarre step further, possessing the ability to spit acid harmful enough to actually melt human flesh. But it doesn't stop there. Agony also possesses the weird and unique ability to absorb substances and then reuse them itself, like Spider-Man's webbing. Number 8. Magic Venom. This whole thing doesn't make a ton of sense to me, to be honest, though the abilities, I guess, can be explained away by being connected to magic? During the War of the Realms, Eddie Brock got to create his own version of Venom when he was gifted a Dreamstone by a dark elf witch. After he accepted it, the witch revealed that Eddie would now have to serve and fight for her ruler Malekith. Haha, gotcha. But of course, Eddie didn't want to, so instead, he chomped off one of her arms. That whole interaction was pretty weird, because, I mean, obviously, he's just gonna bite off one of your arms. What do you think was gonna happen, witch? And Eddie then used the Dreamstone, which can make your dreams come true, to create a new version of a magic Venom suit, which was also pretty strange. This version of Venom came with no voice of its own, but for some reason seemed to amplify Eddie's negative emotions. As such, Eddie decided to split up the magical symbiote, having the power to do so, transforming it into Asgardian armor for the civilians that he saved. Already a pretty weird ability. He could also control weather with the symbiote, because I guess dreams and magic?
Number 7. Hope Summers. Hope Summers is one of the most powerful mutants in all the 616 universe. Or is it the Prime universe now? I can never tell anymore. Hope was born at a time when no new mutants were supposed to emerge and unleashed a psionic blast so powerful it destroyed Cerebro. Was this psionic blast explained? Not really, but let's move on. It was later explained that Hope has the ability to mimic the abilities of mutants in her general vicinity, and is also able to boost the abilities of those around her. Mimicry is a pretty straightforward ability, right? So where does all this other stuff come from? Like, remember the time when she cured Rogue of the uncurable Strain 88 virus? Or remember when Rogue's touch could kill anyone, but it didn't kill Hope, she could just carry her around normally? And she's also undetectable by Cerebro, so is she even a mutant? I don't even know anymore. In at number 6, Deadman. Boston Brand was one of the greatest trapeze artists of all time, and would captivate audiences under his stage name, Deadman. Unfortunately, during one of his routines, Boston was murdered and then resurrected as a ghost with the powers of possession. Using these powers, Boston, now only referring to himself as Deadman, attempts to solve the mystery of his own murder. Now, see, I love Deadman. I think he's a very unique character, and the stories he's involved with are really cool. However, sometimes his general power of possession gets a little muddled. As a ghost, he should be able to jump into whoever he wants, right? But no, he has a lot of restrictions. If somebody is already being mind controlled, no. Has magical power, no. Or someone who has a really strong will, no. So why does this happen? I know he needs obstacles in order to be a good character, but there's never a definitive reason as to why he can't possess these kinds of people. I mean, like, okay, hear me out. What if he tried really hard? Like, harder than he's ever tried before? Like, would it work? I don't know, you gotta tell me, DC.
Number 5, Tag. Okay, I actually kinda wish I had Brian Cruz's power. It just seems like the perfect chaos creating ability. Tag's ability, known as the Pariah effect, allows him to use a form of telepathy when he touches someone that causes the target to emit a psionic signal, which would make them a target for others to run away from or to run towards. Whichever way people would run, they would do it while being fully aware of what they're doing, but unable to control themselves. If they were being controlled to run away, they would continue to do so until they were about 100 feet away. But if the signal caused them to run towards whoever it is, then they would dogpile on top of the target. What's strange is that he could also control who was affected by the ability. Like, how? He only made one person it, so how does he decide who runs away and who doesn't? He could also make whoever was it run away from themselves. So in other words, they would just run uncontrollably and in random directions, which is actually kind of hilarious. He also would always say, "You're it," which is kind of misleading because that person can't tag someone else to make them it, which is kind of unfair as well. So
Number 4, Dupe. Ranking a little lower for me because he's not necessarily a mutant maybe, is Dupe. Dupe is a creature who often is lumped in with the mutants, but maybe isn't one? We don't really know what Dupe is, never mind his power set. Dupe is basically an unstoppable force and has been implied to be a mutant, an alien, a mutant alien, or something else entirely. As of right now, his origin is classified on his own wiki with him being an artificial being, which really doesn't help to clarify anything. If he is a mutant, and I'm not saying conclusively that he is or that he isn't, as I still feel like his origin in general can be really contested at this point, his powers really are hard to classify. It's kind of like he's an old school superhero in the sense that he seems to have powers for whatever task he needs to accomplish at the time, including resurrection, the power of funk, love eyes, breaking the fourth wall, moving between panels, and even magic. Dupe has been spotted seemingly fighting alongside the mutants as recently as the AXE Judgment Day event, implying that he is at least allied with Krakoa. For those of you that don't think he's a mutant, I still kind of think he might be. Who knows?
Number 3, Hijack. The mutant known as David Bond has the oddly specific ability to control vehicular mechanisms with his thoughts. Basically, this is a form of technopathy, and he has been able to control automobiles and shield helicarriers, starting their engines, steering them, and even opening their doors. He has also been shown to be able to control high-tech suits of armor. Now, this kind of leads me to have more questions than anything else. Like, can he control motorcycles? What about bicycles? Rollerblades? Does the vehicle need to have an internal computer? What's the deal with opening and closing car doors? Does that not count as a form of telepathy? Why can he control high-tech suits of armor? What if a car has mechanical issues? Can he tell? Does the vehicle need to be in complete functioning order? Does it need to be able to turn on? I have so many questions and like no answers.
Number 2, Ice Cream. Ice Cream. Oh boy, what a wonderful weirdo this is. You know how much I have a strange affinity for mutants who have eye-based mutations and visual power sets if you're, usually on this channel, and if you are usually on this channel, you should subscribe if you aren't already. But despite the I in Ice Cream's name, he is not one of those. Instead, his mutant power seems to be that he can turn himself into ice cream. Get it? I scream. Ice cream. He's only appeared once, I believe, in the comics, making a singular appearance in a strange comic in and of itself from Marvel, Obnoxio the Clown, issue number 1. In this weird single issue, Obnoxio is a clown and he's employed to act as entertainment for a surprise birthday party at the X Mansion that is being hosted for young X-member Kitty Pryde. While this is going on, Ice-Cream, a villain, also appears and sneaks into the mansion, hoping to coordinate a stealthy attack on the X-Men. Instead, he ends up attempting to get Obnoxio out of the way, which he kinda succeeds in, only to later be captured in a block of ice, because he can turn into ice cream. What I want to know is, what was Ice-Cream's plan of attack with his power set? Is anyone on the main team featured here lactose intolerant? Was that his plan? I have to know.
Number 1. El Guapo. Tell me that someone, thanks to genetic mutation, can fold space or speak binary code or always win, and I'll look at you sideways, but I'll nod and walk away. But you tell me that some guy named Robbie Rodriguez, thanks to a genetic mutation, has no actual powers of his own, but instead has a symbiotic relationship with a superpowered flying skateboard, which followed his mental commands and sometimes even seemed to have a personality of its own or acted on his subconscious thoughts. I'm sorry, I'm out. I'm done. Where did the skateboard come from? How did he discover this ability? When did this mutant power activate? Can he do this to other skateboards or inanimate objects in general? You can't just give someone the most unique and insane mutant ability and explain none of it.
Starting off at number 10, we have Magic, or Ilyana Rasputin, named after a really bad Russian guy. Not really. She first appeared in 1975 in the Giant Size X-Men issue number 1. Now, she originated from Lake Baikal, Russia, which, on a side note, by the way, is one of the oldest, most clearest lakes in the entire world. It's also one of the deepest lakes. It's the 7th largest lake in the world. Okay, a little bit of a side fact there, I kinda like that sort of stuff. Let's get back to Magic. Now Magic, she was taken to the United States of America by a villain known as Arcade. Eventually though, she was rescued and became a glorious member of the X-Men, but her powers consisted of teleportation, where she brings out these little stepping discs which originate from a dimension known as Limbo. Now she's capable of teleporting not just in small regions but across continents, and she can even teleport through space and time. Crazy, I know, which others cannot do. She also has the ability to form her own armor, which when she uses her magic more from the Limbo universe, it just gets stronger. And that's what makes people wonder, is exactly what this universe is and how does she manage to harness this energy? It's really unknown. However, she's a sorceress of the Limbo universe, and that's all we got. As a matter of fact, she ended up absorbing all of the Limbo universe, which pretty much nowadays when she teleports, weird images of ghosts and dragons and other creatures now appear. I have no idea. It's comic books. Number 9, we've got Michael Pointer, or simply known as Omega. He's actually got a few different names as well, I'll get into that. Now originally he was just a simple postman before he found out that he was a mutant. He's capable of not just absorbing people and mutants for their powers, but he can also take on personalities, that's right. His powers have always been extremely strong, that his suit had to be made by Reed Richards so he could regulate his powers. There was also a point in his superhero career where he absorbed the power of 50 mutants and Zorn. Zorn merged with Michael Pointer and ended up killing almost all the members of Alpha Flight. The thing with Michael Pointer is that he does not need to touch mutants to take the power, he could just be right near them. It's kinda silly. And he actually managed to almost take all of the powers from every single mutant on Earth. He's kinda like Superman of absorption, an unstoppable machine with his powers having unknown origins. Yep. I could write for comic books. Number 8, we got Phantom X, which is probably the coolest name of all of these guys, I'm gonna be honest. Now, he first appeared in 2002 in the new X-Men series number 128, created out of the Weapon Plus program and acted as a Super Sentinel for a while. The Weapon Plus program made a group of people or mutants with techno-organic organisms being fused with nanotechnology of a Sentinel. I don't really know what that means, but Phantom X was born from his mother, who was one of these Weapon Plus made people, when she was fertilized with nano machines. So his powers, they're interesting because he has a nervous system known as the EVA, which can become external, and when the EVA actually leaves him, he becomes more powerful because he doesn't even feel his injuries. Also, the EVA can shapeshift, it identifies as a woman. Phantom X also even has a backup internal nervous system in case EVA gets damaged. Phantom X also has the ability to go into a state of mind and do his own self-repairs. He's an amazing marksman, and his bullets apparently never miss because they are laced with mutant skin. At one point, he was capable of even skewing reality with illusions. weird. Number 7, we got Glob Herman. Now the coolest guy, but the lamest name at the same time. First appeared in what was known as the New X-Men Volume 2 138. The prime of Miss Emma Frost May 2013 issue. Now this guy is made up of essentially living wax. It's known as bioparaffin. And his internal organs are pretty much viewable. You can see it, so you can see his bones. They float inside. It's really cool. Now bioparaffin apparently reacts to heat extremely well, and what we do know that this stuff gives him great strength, and at one point he acted as a major heat shield for the X-Men Academy class when they transported to Sword Base. At one point he joined fellow classmates in the Omega game. Glob ended up attacking civilians and joined in the fight against the X-Men. Now the X-Men succeeded in taking him down by burning off that wax layer. He also is known to flick his wax off in small portions, and besides real awesome strength, we don't really know what else it does. Number 6, Shatterstar. I do like the name of this. First appeared in 1991, a part of the New Mutants series. Now, he still remained very popular. As a matter of fact, he was in the second Deadpool movie. He originated from a planet called Mojo World, which was also a century in the future and in another dimension, and I'll get to that and his powers in a short bit. Basically, he's a genetically engineered individual, and he learned to fight in the arenas on Mojo World. Now, for his powers, he has superhero strength, he can time travel, and also dimension travel. Pretty awesome. He also has extreme senses, keeping him alert, and his weapon, which is a staff, is extremely strong. At one point, he was capable of hitting the Thing into a building, which is like, what? I don't know how you do that. Because he was also engineered, his bones are hollow, so he can go really fast. As a matter of fact, he's expected to be able to dodge machine gun fire at point blank range. He's also extremely intelligent and can learn things like languages very quickly.
And at 5, Metamorpho. Metamorpho is a head scratcher. Also known as the Element Man, Metamorpho is a DC character who helped found the Outsiders, and first appeared in 1965 in The Brave and the Bold issue 57. He was a product of the popularity of Fantastic Powers, a successor to Doom Patrol and Metal Men, and his abilities consisted of elemental shapeshifting, super strength, and invulnerability. While those last two are pretty straightforward, it's the shapeshifting that we're concerned with. When you think elemental, you think fire, earth, water, air, right? Well, Metamorpho is more complex than that, which often causes confusion surrounding the character. He can transmute his body into a variety of elemental compounds that he can then form to his will. In other words, he is a much more science-based hero. Now initially, he was restricted to elements that naturally occur within the human body, but over time that became less and less of a limitation, with writers allowing him to assume forms of gas, liquids, or solid states. He can alter the shapes and consistencies of these elements to form complex compounds, and can shape parts and portions of his body rather than being forced to change it in its entirety. He is capable of forming himself into complex structures the likes of tanks and a bicycle, or more ambiguous stuff like a cloud. Moving on to number 4, Super Teen. On one of our previous lists we mentioned Pureheart, the superhero version of Archie's comics namesake, Archie Andrews. He is a superhero who is pure of heart, if his name didn't give that away. And what exactly he is capable of is questionable at best. As long as he remains pure of heart, he has superpowers. You guys should probably go watch part 3 of this list if you're curious. Now for those of you who already have, at this number we have one of his companions, the superhero version of Betty Cooper, who comes to be when Betty twists her magical ponytail. Actually, her powers are supposed to be similar to Pureheart's, which, yes, just makes her more confusing. She has been described as a hero who can, I quote, do just about anything with her snappy looking costume and jet belt. So we know she can fly, we know she has super strength, we know that she is super durable, and we know her powers come to be when she witnesses someone's life in danger. For example, Archie about to get hit by a truck, Archie about to fall off a ledge, Archie about to hurt himself in pretty much any way possible, because apparently he is super klutzy. Or at least he is when Super Teen's around. But aside from that, she just tends to be a bit vague in her portrayals, hence her inclusion on this list. And just baffling conceptually in general. It's like Archie Comics is like, let's make our characters into superheroes. That's a great idea, and it just didn't really work out. And at 3, Extrano. Extrano is a character who didn't receive the best of treatment in his early years. A DC character, Extrano first appeared in Millennium issue 2 in 1988 and is a superhero magician, although many might remember him for what he's generally mocked for. A magical gay character who was attacked by an AIDS vampire called Hemogoblin that then made him HIV positive. You can't make this up. Needless to say, the portrayal was not a great one, especially for the queer community in a time when there was plenty of misconceptions about AIDS. He was a character who was selected by the Guardians of the Universe to take part in an experiment in human evolution, which made him into a powerful magician, whose sorcery abilities were never really fully elaborated upon. He would dress in loose, colorful garments, refer to himself as Auntie, and was pretty much coded as a homosexual character, who later would acquire a powerful skull crystal that made him more masculine, which was largely believed to be the result of negative comments from readers. His magic consisted of stage tricks, using ping pong balls to outwit his foes. He could levitate and fire blasts of energy from his hands, but not much of what he could do was explained in great detail. He was very much the token magician character. Now these days he's gotten a bit more of a makeover, although his abilities are still quite ambiguous. He appeared in DC Rebirth, working with Midnighter to locate Apollo's soul in hell. According to writer Steve Orlando, who himself is bisexual, I quote, "With a book like Midnighter and Apollo, which from cover to cover is a love letter to queer characters and our struggle to live, be visible and loved, it felt right to return one of the first and reintroduce him to a new generation." Maybe there's hope for Extrano after all. Up next at 2, Doorman. Doorman, aka Damar Davis, is a Marvel character who first appeared in West Coast Avengers Volume 2, Issue 46 in 1989, and was a member of the Great Lakes Avengers. He responded to Mr. Immortal's ad for Heroes for the Great Lakes team, who, on paper, can generate portals, and can fly via skis, which yes is weird. He is intangible and can also bring souls to the afterlife. It's a confusing set of skills, right? But here's where it gets more perplexing. His portal ability has a restriction. He can teleport people through walls, with his body serving as that portal, hence the name Doorman. Concerning the skis, he can summon them at will, although that doesn't make them any less confusing. If anything, his most useful talent is delivering souls to oblivion, but even then, he can only do it if that person is deceased, and he becomes only visible to that soul. It's like his creators didn't really think the portal ability was enough, so they decided to use the more mythical version of the Doorman, or Gatekeeper, and make him all about death, which, for the record, was a power of his added after the fact. And finally, in at number 1, Rainbow Girl. Ending off our list with an inherently sexist creation, we have Rainbow Girl. Rainbow Girl is an extraterrestrial character who first appeared in 1963 in DC's Adventure Comics issue 309. She is a metahuman who wields the power of the mysterious emotional spectrum, resulting in unpredictable mood swings. You can't make this up. It's like my mantra for this whole series. She would tap into colors that would result in different moods. Red being anger, blue being hope, green being willpower. She once also exhibited the ability to create a pheromone field that surrounded her in a giant rainbow and gave her an irresistible personality. Ugh. But here's where it gets utterly fascinating. Even DC doesn't know what the hell she can do. According to Jeff Johns, during the Blackest Night event, he noted that Rainbow Girl doesn't fully understand her powers and uses them more for fun. Just kill me now.
Number 10, Mr. Mxyzptlk. Mxyzptlk? Now I spent some time practicing how to say this, and I ended up going with the Superman animated series Gilbert Gottfried pronunciation. So this little imp from the 5th dimension first debuted in Superman number 30 in 1944. He's a being who comes over to our dimension to torment Superman, and he can only be vanquished if Superman can trick him into saying his name backwards, which I'm not going to attempt, so it's a good thing I'm not Superman. Now his year of creation places him smack dab in the Golden Age, right before the superhero crash, but he would return again in the Silver Age and has been utilized ever since. Over time his nature has changed based on the writer, from good-hearted trickster to malicious spirit, and back and forth. But okay, his powers, what can he do? Well, this is a question of what can't he do, as very well exemplified by the Emperor Joker storyline, wherein the Joker manages to get his hands on his powers and completely remake the universe. So basically, Mr. Only Consonants in his name has an unlimited power source, and he can warp reality in any way he can imagine. Now how he does this varies. Sometimes it's just because he comes from the 5th dimension, and their reality is so beyond ours in comparison that it makes him seem godlike. Other times it's using their advanced tech, but it's usually the dimension-based perks. Also, he needs no sustenance. In the 5th dimension, no sleeping or eating. No wonder he has so much free time to torment Superman. I tried, I legit practiced, and I'm still just like Number 9. Dr. Light. Dr. Light, the first one, Arthur Light, even though it was retconned that he was the second one, even though he appeared first, comics. He first appeared in Justice League of America number 12 back in 1962, and at first he was a fairly standard villain. He would fight the Teen Titans a lot and use light manipulation. The thing that vacillates with him is what type of villain he is. I mean, back when they used him. His character was essentially ruined in Identity Crisis when he was suddenly turned into a rapist, and now a lot of writers don't even want to touch him. So back to his powers. How exactly does he use light? Well, he bends light around him and can generate energy blasts with them and also force fields, and by manipulating light correctly he can fly. He can also create complete darkness, which is a handy trick and I'm sure catches some by surprise because of his name. That's the way. Always keep him guessing. He used to need tech, but now he doesn't because, well, changes. Now what people aren't sure of is what's his upper limit. How much light can he harness and control, and where can he get it from? And the answer is wherever the writers want. That's the thing with light-based powers. These ones can vary a lot. Sometimes they'll be really ineffectual and other times they'll be all-encompassing. Number 8. The Clock King. That's right, the Clock King is on this list. Not the first one though, so Tem, the second one. The first Clock King was just a very punctual person. His power was being super anal, and I can respect that. But he's a villain that often gets forgotten. Now the second Clock King was a temporal anomaly, an actual anomaly, but he wore the old Clock King costume. I'm not sure why, because it wasn't that great. He feeds on people's energy to maintain his youth. I don't know, I just feel there is so much potential for the Clock King based on his name. Yeah, there's not much here, I just want to talk about the Clock King. I mean, no one else does. Poor Clock King. He's a king. Number 7. Dr. Doom. Now some of you may be like, Dr. Doom? Come on, I know everything there is to know about Dr. Doom. Well, we'll see. Now Dr. Doom debuted in the Fantastic Four number 5 back in 1962. Here's the thing, Dr. Doom is a genius and well versed in science, which people remember, but he's also skilled in sorcery, because he has none of that drama about, oh no, science versus magic. No, he's like, both exist and I will master both, for I am Doom. He was also taught by aliens in the art of being able to psionically transfer his consciousness into another with eye contact. And of course then there's his armor. It's ridiculously augmented. It augments his strength, stores energy, food, water, just all of it. Oh, also, he has diplomatic immunity. That's kind of a power, and Doom definitely uses it that way. Number 6. The Juggernaut. Now when people think of the Juggernaut, many will think of the memes, the glorious Juggernaut memes. The Juggernaut first appeared in the X-Men number 12 back in 1965, and many forget that he got his powers from the Cyttorak gem, which has empowered him with magical abilities and strength. He is an immortal avatar for that entity. He can generate a mystical force field, which makes him nigh invulnerable to physical damage at least. The helmet is for something else entirely. That's to protect him from psychic attacks, especially from his stepbrother Charles. That's right, Charles Xavier. Over time, he has gained more and more access to the gem's powers, so watch out. Number 5. Identity Crisis. Identity Crisis is one of those stories that was really well received when it was released, but people now look back on it with a bit of a jaded eye. Identity Crisis was released from June to December of 2004, and was written by famed thriller novelist Brad Meltzer, who wanted to create a thriller in the superhero format. The ramifications it had on characters and some of the mischaracterizations are still discussed to this day. But paradoxically, it was very solidly written. It just really needs to be taken on its own in a bubble, which thanks to 2 universe-wide shifts since, one can now do. So the villainess of this tale was Jean Loring, the former wife of the Atom, Ray Palmer, who set about terrorizing the loved ones of heroes so that she and the Atom would get back together because he'd be concerned about her safety. The only thing is, right out the gate, she accidentally killed the elongated man's wife, and then it was just a case of escalation. Let me kill my friend so that my ex will get back with me. Or, you know, I could call him. This is why she ended up in Arkham, which was also a terrible idea. She knew identities, but Ray put her there anyway. Maybe they truly were meant to be. Number 4. Lex makes a robotic Lois Lane. So Lex is obsessed with Clark on many levels, some that he probably doesn't want to admit to himself. And he's always scheming something. Remember when Connor Kent, aka Con-El, was Lex and Clark's son before they retconned that? Well, I will always remember. The New 52? What's that? So in Action Comics number 890, we learned that Lex's assistant had made a Lois Lane robot, and while Lex was like, okay, thanks, I'll keep it. And he did, and he slept with her. It's just weird. This is just bizarre villainous behavior. It happened while plotting, really, but you need to know. I mean, he's creating clones of him and Clark's DNA. He's sleeping with a Lois Lane bot. There are things that need to be discussed here that probably never will be. All I'm gonna say is, Klex. Number 3. Dr. Doom vs. Office Supplies. This comic is from 2006, and its full title is Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four in Brain Drain, Teachers Count / Office Max Custom Comic number 1. This comic features Dr. Doom trying to drain the intelligence out of the children of the world. But really what this story is about is being sponsored by Office Max and featuring some actual teachers. This is a PSA comic, so a public service announcement. Its message is that teachers need to be paid more. How it delivers that message, well, basically it's trying to talk about how they have to contend with real world issues like having to buy their own office supplies, but then goes, thankfully there's Office Max, so they're super affordable, hint hint. And also they take on ignorance, such as Dr. Doom's brain drain machine. This comic does have some stellar moments though, such as the teachers throwing office supplies at Doom, and also Reed being impressed by the Office Max supply store. He's actually like, wow, look at all these supplies, rubber bands and a ball. Reed is impressed by many things, but a ball of rubber bands? Okay, sure Jan. Number 2. Magneto was Zoran all along. This arc and the retcon that had to be done afterwards are still confusing to people. So Zoran debuted in the new X-Men Annual number 1, and he existed, like he was real, only at some point he was replaced by Magneto, and no one noticed, because Magneto sort of mimicked the abilities that Zoran had, and he was masked. But then he was unmasked, and haha, with the help of Chinese supporters, it was Magneto the whole time, and he wasn't dead, and he did all this, pretended to be a teacher for months because he wanted to infiltrate the X-Men. So yeah, this was clearly a reveal to be a reveal, and then they had to retcon it away, and it doesn't even make sense how they did it. Just why? Unpopular opinion, I think this entire run by Grant Morrison is overrated. Leave your unpopular opinions down below. I can see them now. You're overrated. You move your hands too much. Number 1. Big Barda and Superman are kidnapped to make a porno. So for this we need to go back to Action Comics number 592, and in this story, poor Barda, who is just adjusting to her life on Earth, tries to stop a crime, only to end up in the sewers and kidnapped by a villain called the Sleaze, who lives up to his name and then some. He can control people's emotions and force them to do his bidding, and his plan at first is just to make her dance for him. But by happenstance, Superman ends up tracking Sleaze to the sewers, and then they both end up under his control, and his next plan is to take them to a pornographer to shoot an official porn movie for the money. The worst part, they're both fighting it the entire time, but can't. Thankfully, they're saved by Barda's husband, Mr. Miracle, and all they've done is kiss. Okay, this plan, it makes sense, it's just really gross and icky. It's not even a bad story, it just leaves you feeling like you need several showers. It's a super petty, weak plan. I mean, Sleaze, you were from Apocalypse, and this is the best you got? Actually, I'm kinda glad. If this was the B plan, I don't want to see the A plan. It's probably like a superhero orgy or something.
And at number 10, interdimensional travel, The Flash. Complex powers, yay! The Flash's second iteration in the form of Silver Age baby Barry Allen tends to take the laws of science and just twist them, making them arguably inconceivable in our real world, but really neat to see on the panels of DC's comics. Of course, that lends itself to be a tad confounding. Such is the Flash's interdimensional travel powers. Now, according to the comics, the Flash can vibrate his body at a molecular level, which allows him to transfer himself between dimensions. Now, initially this was something that could only be achieved by his cosmic treadmill, but in later years he gained the ability to do this himself by increasing the intensity and speed of his vibrations. Now, to make things a little bit more complicated, adjusting those two factors acts as a means for a lot of the things that Barry can do, but more on that in a bit. Up next, number 9, talking to fish. Aquaman, of course. While Aquaman's ability to communicate with aquatic life has long been the butt of many jokes aimed at the DC's King of Atlantis, there's actually been some major retconning over the years when it comes to the scope of this ability and how it's defined, and just in general how people understand it. It's not just like chatting with a fish. For example, in the New 52, in the first issue of Aquaman, Arthur Curry is chilling at a restaurant when he's mildly harassed by other customers there, who make a point of saying that everyone knows Aquaman talks to fish. Arthur does not hesitate to clear this up, noting that, I quote, "Fish don't talk. Their brains are too primitive to carry on a conversation. I reach into their midbrains and telepathically push them to help me out. Squids, sharks, eels, it's all the same, though dolphins are another story." Now, many of the jokes surrounding Aquaman, primarily spawned from the Super Friends cartoon of the past, were dealt with head-on by Jeff Johns in this series, and it was actually a pretty solid start to the Aquatic Heroes New 52 comic. Now let's flash forward though to the Justice League Aquaman Drowned Earth Special 1 and Justice League issue 11, more recent Rebirth comics. DC started exploring grander concepts here. And similar to Barry Allen's Speed Force connection, Arthur Curry has a connection to something called Life Force, which apparently, according to Scott Snyder, could suggest that Aquaman might have the ability to communicate with all life. And yes, that is still pretty confusing, especially when DC has noted that they haven't changed Aquaman's powers, but rather just want to expand the meaning of them. Right. But hey, he doesn't talk to fish one-on-one, so there you go. That solves that question. Just leave it as the New 52 explanation. I'm sure people will be fine with that. Up next, number 8, one of my personal favorites, Batman's plot armor. Alright, hear us out on this one, my friends. Batman has this uncanny ability to always manage to defeat foes who, objectively speaking, could straight up murder him 5 times over. This is because the Cape Crusader is always prepared. It's like his shtick. And it's his plot armor. Plot armor is a term that refers to a character's unusual ability to survive infinite damage due to their importance to the story. And who isn't more important than Batman? I mean, sure, you could argue Superman, but hey, the duo are pretty darn special and arguably the most iconic superheroes of all time. Anywho, just take a look at Batman's history and it's easy to see this happen. Hell, look at the Tower of Babel's story. Batman, being the paranoid and hyper-intelligent individual he is, literally came up with a plan to stop every single superpowered peer of his on the Justice League team, just in case one of them lost their shit and turned bad. I mean, in the long run, it was a good plan, but still, he's obsessive. And he's also rarely outdone because of that. He's arguably one of the only heroes who are a match for the Man of Steel, despite, not having any superpowers whatsoever. Money and brains don't technically count as a superpower, friends. Moving on to number 7, the electromagnetic spectrum vision from Martian Manhunter. Similar to our previous Flash number, here we have a sophisticated ability that occasionally goes over some readers' heads, and hey, not criticizing with that. Scientific logic in comic books is very different than the laws reality follows, as we mentioned earlier. Martian Manhunter, who will be making another appearance on this list a little later on, is a complex character. Yes, he is a green Martian from Mars, but he also is a being who has a plethora of powers, some of which are a little difficult to wrap your head around. Ja'on Jones is capable of seeing across the electromagnetic spectrum. What on earth does that entail? So, you know how Superman has that nifty X-ray vision of his? Now think of this power as a ridiculously amped up version of that. Nicknamed Martian Vision, it allows Ja'on to not only use X-ray vision but to see infrared, ultraviolet, and microwave wavelengths. While we don't entirely know how this is visually represented to the Martian, since there's yet to be a proper POV panel featuring this in DC Comics, or at least that we know of, let us know if we're wrong in the comments, but we can imagine that it would share some similarities to how the Predators in Predators see other kinds of heat signatures or wavelengths, so hey. Speaking of characters with vast skill sets, that brings us to our next number. In at number 6, Shazam, and like all of his powers. Shazam is one of those characters whose befuddling history often leads to those less familiar with the hero getting confused with the full range of his powers and also getting him confused with Marvel's Captain Marvel. But there is reason to get confused. So for starters, if you were unaware, Shazam used to be called Captain Marvel back when the character was owned by Fawcett Comics, the original publisher who created Billy Batson back in the Golden Age. Back then, he would say the word Shazam and he would be transformed from a boy to a grown man with superpowers. That still remains the same. DC though would eventually buy out the rights to Fawcett properties after DC basically sued them for the character being too similar to Superman. Fawcett essentially went bankrupt. It's actually pretty tragic. Now by that time, Marvel had already published their Captain Marvel, so DC changed the character's name to Shazam moving forward so there wouldn't be any confusion and more lawsuits. If that wasn't confusing enough, let's take a look at the abilities that Shazam has. And also just to clear this up, when he says Shazam, the magic word, that is also the name of the wizard who gave Billy his powers, but it's also an acronym for what his powers do. Shazam is made up of the names and abilities of 6 immortal elders. First there's Solomon, who gives him his wisdom. Then there's Hercules, who gives him his strength. Atlas, who is stamina and invulnerability. Zeus, which gives him immortality, electricity generation and manipulation, power over lightning, and basically all things electric. Next up is Achilles, who gives him his willpower and superhuman durability. And courage. And lastly, Mercury, who gives him his speed and flying abilities. All in all, there is a lot going on there, and it's a lot more detailed than what we just went through. It would be easy to see how some of those abilities could be confusing to some, especially when there is that common belief that Shazam is basically just Superman but goofier. Which he kind of is, to be fair.
Number 5, we got Gold Balls. Probably the worst name for a hero, but I mean, let's be perfectly honest, it's self-explanatory. He pretty much takes these gold balls that he can just produce and projects them from any part of his body. On top of that, he can call in an infinite amount of them, and he can not only shoot them in a straight line, but he can also direct them. Pretty weird kind of ability. I mean, magic balls that can also grow in size. Wouldn't the ladies love that? Yeah. Number 4, we got Blink. Now, a member of Generation X, also in the film Days of Future Past, which is my favorite X-Men film, if you guys really wanted to know that. Now, she's extremely unstable. Sounds like a lot of mutants these days, but oh well. Now, she has the ability to not just teleport herself, but other people around her, which sometimes seems all too convenient. Now, this ability makes her being able to also teleport objects and other things that she can use against her enemies. As for how she does this, we don't really know. Number 3, Forge, a man of great technology, and not just good at inventing things, but he can also perceive mechanical energy in action, which basically means he can look at something and go, ah, that's how you use it. Pretty much he's a guy that just went to Harvard University for engineering and walked out and said, yep, I'm smart. Actually, to be perfectly honest, it's not realistically through intelligence, more or less like technological instinct. Sometimes he'll make something or figure something out and he doesn't really know why, and then he has to go back and he's like, oh, that's how I did it. On top of that, he's also a user of magic. He uses Native American magic, but simple, he's just like an Iron Man. Just different. Number 2, you've got Dazzler. Now she is one of the weirdest. I mean, I don't understand any of her powers. I don't know if she's still being made, but either way, apparently she can transduce sonic vibrations. She uses a range of frequencies, she uses the audible spectrum, and uses sound pressure levels. What does that mean? Well, apparently she uses sound and music because music is very pleasing to her. Yeah, that's right. She uses this energy to create light waves that can either put like a trance effect on her enemies. She can also blind her enemies. She is incapable of being blinded, and she also can create holograms and convert this energy to fly. How she does this, nobody really knows. Basically, it's a lot of BS, but it was probably designed by a music student. Number 1, we've got Rogue. I know a lot of you guys are gonna go, come on, really? But realistically, for me, I don't really understand Rogue. I mean, you guys already know a lot about Rogue, so I'm not going to get into the details of her, but we really don't understand her, powers to a degree. And one of the biggest problems is that she's had a different amount of abilities through time, and that's what gets really conflicting. Now, we all know her that she has the ability to absorb other people's powers and other mutants' powers, so basically that means no kissy kissy for her. Thank you. However, in some cases, she can also not just absorb their powers, but their memories, their personalities. Apparently, she can duplicate herself into her victims. So I'm like, yeah, I feel like she's just the vampire of mutants, At one point she got so powerful she could do an instant death touch. After the Messiah complex, she had the ability to control her powers, so yeah, she could get it on and not kill somebody. It's great. She also apparently, absorbed Miss Marvel's powers at one point and even Wonder Man's powers, which she had a problem doing that in the past. But one thing is, when she absorbs the powers, her victims are sometimes unconscious for a while, and yeah, how she gets her powers, we don't really know.
Number 10, Lactuca the Knower. Lactuca is a strange new character who I kinda love. Their powers are very interesting and unique. Lactuca in essence knows the location of everything and anything. Being considered as an Omega level mutant, as so many are in Araco who sit on the Great Ring, Lactuca resembles a night sky, looking like a sheet covered in stars with fabric that's made up from the cosmos. So cool! Lactuca's powers also might not seem so great in the sense that, spatial awareness, while useful, isn't exactly considered powerful even when it's on a cosmic and universal scale, possibly even multiversal. Although the amount of times I've put down my phone and not known where it is, when it's even in my hand, I feel like having someone like you could just be like, yo, where's my phone? And they could be like, oh, it's right there. That would be pretty useful. However, when combined with the powers of a teleporter, while still strange, Lactuca's powers could be seen as exceptionally great, because then you can just teleport anywhere. It's crazy.
Number 9, Cypher. Cypher has what some people believe to be a pretty horrible mutant ability, especially when it comes to combat. Personally, I would kill to be able to subconsciously translate any written or spoken language, human or alien. He can also subconsciously understand body language and intention, as well as decipher codes and computer languages. After he was resurrected, and also so Marvel could make him actually useful, everything he sees is interpreted into language, basically making him able to read life. Everything I just said is strange enough, but I can wrap my head around it to some degree, I guess. But don't you dare sit here and tell me that this man can speak binary code. In New Mutants Volume 3, number 14, a guy operating a mech comes upon Cypher during a battle, and Dougie Boy speaks to the mech saying, hello, you don't have to do this. I can set you free, show you how to think for yourself. The dude operating the mech understands him, since he's speaking English, but for some reason, the mech, which isn't artificial intelligence, also understands him, boots the operator out, and begins talking in zeros and ones. What?
Number 8, Manifold. If you thought Lactuca was an interesting character, wait till you hear about Manifold. Although with Lactuca being newer, you may already know of Manifold, because Manifold's been around for a while. But do you know how exactly his powers work? That is what is so cool, but can also be kind of confusing. Manifold is seen as a massively powerful teleporter, but the interesting thing is he actually isn't. I mean, he is really powerful, but he's not technically a teleporter. Instead, Eden Vesey's mutant powers are based in communication, specifically communication with space. He is considered a universal shaper who can basically communicate with the universe over 616 and ask it to bend and fold for him, which is how he appears to teleport himself and others such great distances. But really, it's just talking.
Number 7. Thumbelina. Christina Anderson has an ability that quite a few characters in comic books have. That would be the ability to shrink. Thumbelina can reduce herself down to about 1/4 of an inch tall. That ability is perfectly fine in my eyes. Like I said, lots of characters can do this. My problem with Thumbelina, and also some other shrinkers, is how the heck do they retain their full-size strength when they get smaller? Or in Thumbelina's case, how the hell does she get stronger when she shrinks? I'm sorry to try and bring physics into any debate about superheroes and their various powers, but it makes absolutely no sense in the laws of physics that someone who is smaller can be more strong than they were when they were regular size. Ants, for example, if they were the size of a person, they would be insanely strong as they are able to carry 20 times their body weight. So that's like an average person being able to carry like a small SUV or something. But since ants are so damn small, that means they can carry like a leaf or something. Thumbelina should not be able to knock someone out when she is 1/4 of an inch tall. I'm sorry, that's all I gotta say.
Number 6. Iska the Unbeaten. Iska's powers are really cool, don't get me wrong, but how does it work exactly? I feel like we still have a lot of exploring to do with this character before we can really firmly answer that question. I've been reading Iska since she came into the comics and I'm still confused. Iska made her first appearance during the 2020 X-Men series, appearing in a tie-in issue to the X-Men crossover event 10 of Swords, which I still personally hold a great fondness for. As such, I also hold a fondness for this character, the sister-in-law to Apocalypse through his mutant wife Genesis. Iska is a mutant of the long-lost mutant island of Araco, and her powers allow her to always win, but sometimes they also force her to always win, like against her will, and then other times, betting against her even can affect the result of a contest, even if she herself isn't involved in that. How does that work? Her powers also do not just extend to physical fights, but all means of competition. So like, if you're, I don't know, doing a coin toss with Iska, she gotta win.
And at number 5, Captain Marvel. Carol Danvers used to have a pretty refined power set. Her body was altered after an explosion caused her DNA to be spliced with that of Kree alien DNA and Mar-Vell's. Danvers gained superhuman strength, endurance, stamina, and flight, and she became the first Ms. Marvel. She later became binary and gained the ability to absorb energy and then project it in photonic form. As binary, she became one of the most powerful beings in the Marvel Universe. But in order to maintain that, she needed a constant stream of energy. What powers does Carol have now that she's Captain Marvel? Well, pretty much whatever the writers want. She can now fly 6 times faster than the speed of sound, can withstand and then absorb the explosion of a nuclear bomb, absorb magic, withstand the pressure of open space without batting an eye. But like, when did this happen? I understand characters evolving and growing over time to become better versions of themselves, but this power level spike happened like almost out of nowhere. And as far as I know, Marvel doesn't have a hyperbolic time chamber. Number 4, The Question. If you've never read a Question comic before, I highly recommend it. This guy is one of my favorite all-time DC heroes, and he does not get enough love around here. Whether it be Vic Sage or Renee Montoya wearing the non-face of The Question, you're going to have an awesome time reading any issue. However, the abomination we got from the New 52 still hurts me deep in my soul. This Question was a man who committed a crime so horrible that the most powerful wizards in existence removed his face, wiped his memory, threw him into the 21st century, and damned him to forever speak in questions. It was so bad, it was retconned a few years later, but still, like, never touch this garbage. Regardless, this version of Vic Sage somehow gained amazing detective skills and became a master of disguise. I guess the wizards who cursed him in the first place didn't want him to be completely useless. And at number 3, Slapstick. I hate this character. I hate this character so much. Like, I really don't want to talk about this character. It's that bad. I wish it was Kelly or Sasha, but they left early and forced me to talk about this garbage, so here we go. Slapstick was exposed to a strange alien device that made his body indestructible at the cost of looking like a garish cartoon character that reeks of early 90s. He has the physics of a cartoon character and can be horribly beaten into a pulp, only to spring back up into perfect form. No matter how many times people try and murder him, he just springs back up and manages to beat them somehow. So that's it, I'm done with Slapstick. But Point done. We're out. And at number 2, Kid Eternity. Kid Eternity is one of my favorite nonsensical heroes of all time. He has the power to summon any good historical or mythological figure by saying Eternity. So you can imagine his comics get really weird very fast. Kid Eternity was later revised to summon demons in the form of said fictional characters that he calls out into battle and then they fight for him. He is promptly murdered in the opening pages of JSA number 1. Then he came back 7 years later to help the Teen Titans fight Brother Blood to prevent him from gaining access to the Door of Life and Death. I told you, his stories get really weird. And in at number 1, Pre-Crisis Superman. Everyone in the world, regardless of whether or not you enjoy comics, knows who Superman is, right? Superman is an icon, with very straightforward powers, and even more straightforward origin for comics. He's an alien baby who came over from a dying planet and gets his powers from our sun. He's got super speed, super strength, can fly. Basically, he can do all the things you wish you could do as a kid. His powers can get a little ridiculous, with like eye lasers and stuff, but you put it all aside because it's a comic book, it's fun, right? But for the most part, you understand how these work. Now that we have established this, let me tell you that Pre-Crisis Superman does not work that way in the slightest. This guy is on a completely different level from who we know today. He has super strength with no limits and can move whatever he wants, including planets. His flight is unimpeded and has no limits. His supervision allowed him to see across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. He can hold his breath indefinitely, so he never has to breathe again. His only weaknesses were kryptonite and radiation from the red sun. But aside from that, nothing could hurt him. He literally flew into the core of a star unharmed. However, his best powers include super ventriloquism, super hypnotism, and the ability to wipe someone's mind with a kiss. What was DC's explanation for all these powers? Well, the sun. Yeah, that's it.
Number 10, Dial H. Now this isn't one specific superhero, but rather a comic series featuring a rotary device called the Dial. Though in the most recent 2019 series, it is a phone, a rotary dial phone, that allows the user to access superpowers when they dial Hero, hence Dial H. The title is 100% a play on the Alfred Hitchcock title Dial M for Murder. This series first debuted in the 60s and has had numerous updates since. The first iteration debuted in House of Mystery number 156 back in 1966. In it, Robert Reed fell into a cavern and found the Dial. He then used it to transform into various superheroes, and they would change. He wasn't always the same one. And it wasn't until the 80s that it would come into play with existing heroes. Although, there was Plastic Man. Plastic Man was a thing back in the day. Also, other people could use the Dial. It wasn't key to one person or anything. The 80s series also had the added aspect that fans could submit their own heroes and villains, and would get credit and a t-shirt. Over time, the series has evolved into an examination of what it means to be a hero, and how finding the Dial impacts people's lives. Spoilers, it's not always for good. The Dial is pretty random with what hero you become, but that's part of the fun. It's the mystery box superhero power generator. I was gonna say loot box, but you don't have to pay for it. Heyo. Well, I mean not with money, but emotionally, oh yes, you pay.
Up next at number 9, Gwenpool. When Gwenpool first hit the scene in 2015, she was a huge success, becoming instantly beloved amongst fans after merely appearing on the cover of Deadpool's Secret Wars issue 2. Here is the thing though, many people mistaken her abilities as those of Deadpool's, with her being assumed to be a female version of Wade Wilson. Gwenpool's name may have hilarious relations to Deadpool's thanks to a goof up from her dry cleaner, and the fact that her last name is Poole, spelled P-O-O-L-E. That was something that was retconned after her first appearance, might I add. So if she doesn't share Deadpool's powers, what exactly can she do? Well, she is a brilliant tactician, has vast knowledge of the Marvel Universe, claiming that she is from a timeline in which she read the comics and is now actually a part of them, plus she breaks the fourth wall like it is nobody's business. She knows her way around a whole lot of weapons, is capable of interdimensional travel, and has a regenerative healing factor, which yes, Deadpool has too, but they're very different characters, people. Very different.
Number 8, Jack Hawksmoor. He is a member of the Authority. This is a Justice League-esque team published by Wildstorm Comics, featuring the characters from Stormwatch. Most people know it because Apollo, the Superman pastiche, and the Midnighter, the Batman pastiche, were married. Yes, I said were. People think of other things too, but this comes up a lot. You know it's true. Okay, so Jack Hawksmoor. He debuted in Stormwatch number 37 back in 1996, and has been in the Authority since issue 1. And he can't survive outside of an urban environment. so no trips to the country for him. When in the city, he has superpowers that are tied to the city. These include super strength and agility, just like a city. Telepathic control, and he can animate objects in the city, like the buildings. This varies a little bit from city to city, and Jack acts like each city is a unique entity, which no way they are. City doesn't feel like a word to me anymore. He one time turned a city into a battle suit for him to wear. He also doesn't need to eat because he converts air pollution into sustenance, so he must be doing great. He can transport between cities in a mini womb thing. What's the confusing part here is, why does the city do this to him? He was modified by humans from the 70th century, which caused him to have these powers. You have a lot of freedom with this. You can do some zany things based on the cities he's in. My plan is just to go into a field in the middle of nowhere and stand there. He's done. These modifications were made to him so he could fight a threat from the future. A city-based threat, clearly.
In at 7, the Impossible Man. The Impossible Man hails from Marvel Comics, first appearing in Fantastic Four issue 11 from 1963. He is an alien character from the planet Pop-Up, which yes is a great name, and he has shape-shifting abilities. Plus he was typically used for comedic relief, portrayed as a lonely, attention-seeking extraterrestrial who annoyed the crap out of the Fantastic Four. In addition to his shape-shifting and mimicry abilities, he could also teleport and had an encyclopedic knowledge of Earth culture. So if that description is so straightforward, how did he end up getting on this list? Well, it's because of how the Impossible Man was depicted. His first appearance had him visiting Earth on vacation and assuming that he was the most powerful being on Earth after meeting the Fantastic Four. And then the story consisted of him harassing the team of heroes, wanting to start up an Earth pop-up travel agency. His earlier depictions gave him unlimited shape-shifting powers via molecular rearrangement, but due to his use as a comedic character, the extent of his abilities often fell into befuddling territory, and the full scale of his powers became questionable, since he was also able to mimic the likes of Thor and Wolverine. All in all, looks really funny, doesn't seem like much of a threat, kind of questionable as to what exactly his shape-shifting abilities can do. We know he can, but overall, very baffling.
Number 6, Zatanna. Now you may be thinking, are you both okay? Everyone understands Zatanna, a magician, she speaks backwards, but what some people miss out on is the scale of her powers. Zatanna is actually one of the most powerful sorceresses on Earth, and her powers appear to be inherited. What people tend to misuse or not remember is that her magic increases if not used. So if she doesn't use her magic, it builds to a critical point, which can cause an incident. This is why she releases it in such a controlled manner. However, if she uses too much, she depletes her powers, so she has to find a balance. She can also do spells spoken forward and has done so on rare occasions, and she can also do blood magic. Also, the limits of her powers are not fully defined. So have we seen the ceiling? We don't know. She's dangerous. Don't be fooled just because you could temporarily stop her with some duct tape.
Moving on to 5, adaptability. The Hulk is one of the most adaptable heroes in comic books. Now because of the speed in which he regenerates tissue, he's able to survive some of the harsher climates, like pressure underwater or the vacuum of outer space. But here is the fun part. He has a gland in his body that creates oxygen to fill his lungs, so when he's underwater or when he's in space, he can function without fear of losing air. His body is also built to sustain extreme amounts of pressure, hence why he's able to walk along the bottom of the ocean, which is a thing he did once. Said need a lot in this video. And at 4, punching through time. I love a good punch through time number. The Hulk is proven capable of punching his way through temporal and spatial dimensions. Weird, right? The science behind this one is a little bit sketchy if we're being honest, hence why it finds a place on this list. Now in the Incredible Hulk issue 135, the character came up against Kang the Conqueror and followed him through the time stream and started punching through it so hard that he made it through to the past. In issue 304 he would be banished to another dimension and encountered old foes, the UFOs, which is their name, and punched Ironclad so hard that it would shake the entire multiverse. He also once tore the fabric of reality by using his thunderclap, or rather a sonic clap, which used sound waves that discharged enough of a burst that they could rip apart the very seams of reality, as seen in Incredible Hulk issue 126. He's so strong that he can f with your reality essentially, so maybe don't piss off the Hulk ever. I mean, you wouldn't want to because you'd probably like you anyway, so. In at 3, honing in on New Mexico. While that might sound like a very strange ability, it's one that makes perfect sense for the Hulk. So, the Hulk is capable of honing in on the place of his superpower origin. This is something we learned about thanks to the Hulk of Future Imperfect, Maestro, a future timeline version of the big green monster who had survived a nuclear war and became a tyrant overlord of sorts, dominating over the planet, collecting trophies of other dead superheroes and villains. He was also completely insane by this point thanks to the extreme amounts of radiation he was absorbing. Anywho, when the Hulk defeats Maestro, he does it by leading him back in time so that he's destroyed by the same gamma bomb that created the Hulk. Therefore, homing in on this spot in New Mexico is because of Maestro's spirit calling out to him. This also ties into 2 other supernatural abilities. So, let's move on to those. In at 2, he can see ghosts. So that whole ability to home in on his origin spot in New Mexico, how Maestro's spirit had called out to him since it's the place where he died, well, this is kind of tied to this too, and his ability to see ghosts. Now this was actually a latent ability of the Hulk's, which first appeared after he accidentally killed his father, whose ghost then haunted him for a while. There's been a bit of a debate as to how exactly the Hulk can see ghosts, hence the confusion surrounding this power. But one answer comes in the form of our next number, and our final number, in at 1, astral sight. The Hulk can see individuals on the astral plane. Now this was first explored in the Defenders when the Hulk interacted with Doctor Strange, who was astral projecting at the time. Others could not perceive Strange's astral form, only Hulk could. While some have linked this ability to Maestro, a more plausible theory has arisen in the form of this ability of the Hulk's being a convenient plot point, which, I mean, yeah. Now, in order to help bring the members of that iteration of Defenders together in a way that made sense, certain editorial choices were made, including having the Hulk be able to see Doctor Strange. But in the story world though, Doctor Strange would speculate that it was a power derivative of some sort of primitive or animalistic aspect of the Hulk's mind, that he could sense a fundamental wrongness in the environment around him, although there wasn't much further elaboration on it. Now others chalk this up to the fact that he has a heightened sense of perception, and how that allows him to hunt and fight off characters the likes of the Wendigo. Plausible theories. I kinda like the last one.
Number 10. Nazis raise milk prices. This comes to us from 1942, so get ready, full steam propaganda ahead. All the heroes who were around at this time period were fighting Nazis, and Wonder Woman was no exception. But they still wanted there to be comic book plots, like this one from Sensation Comics number 7. In this tale, Diana notices that the price of milk is soaring, and she's on the case. She goes to speak to the head of International Milk Co., but he's dismissive. Long story short, they're secret Nazis, and they're raising the price of milk to make it inaccessible for American youth, so that they will have weak, brittle bones and not be able to fight. Playing the long game. They also try to drown her in milk, but she changes in the milk, escapes, and ultimately ensures the safety of good affordable milk prices. That's the kind of out-of-the-box thinking you could expect from the Golden Age villains. Kept you on your toes. Number 9. Ra's al Ghul pretends to be Talia to get Bruce Wayne's body. This is going to take us over to Batman Beyond, and is largely on here because I want to talk about this show and this fantastic episode. This plot comes to us from the episode Out of the Past, and deals with Bruce's sadness about aging and how he feels the best years of his life and his great loves are behind him. When lo and behold, Talia appears, offering him the chance to rejuvenate in the Lazarus Pit, thusly leaving Gotham to Terry and come and finally live their life together. Also, this is all pre-Damian, so she hasn't raped him in this continuity. That's how Damian was conceived. Fast facts. Bruce starts to take her up on it, but as you can imagine, it's too good to be true. And after sharing a kiss, and maybe more, it's revealed that Talia isn't Talia at all. It's Ra's, who has overwritten Talia, taking control of her body. This is all part of a long quest because he wants Bruce's body to rejuvenate it, transfer his consciousness into it, and pretend to be his long-lost heir, continuing his plans with Bruce Wayne's resources. Here's the thing, he didn't have to do this with Bruce. He could have picked any old rich Joe Schmo with no legitimate heirs and tempted them with youth. This was just creepy, and leads me to wonder about his true feelings for Bruce. Great episode, good series, watch it, that is all. And look, I didn't go off on my usual dceu tangent, which this series is a part of. Number 8, we have to take a look at a movie now. We've got Captain America, the really cheesy one from 1990. The movie that gave us a Steve Rogers who steals vans by pretending to be carsick. In this film, the Red Skull is really against the president's pro-environmental campaign, and decides that really there's only one thing to do, and that's kidnap and brainwash him. This is instead of assassinating him, which was an option, but the kidnap brainwash plan is just so much more fun. The Red Skull needs a challenge. There's also nukes involved, but this brainwashing plot was the crux of it. This plan is weak, and if the Red Skull were real, I'm sure he'd sue for slander, cause he'd never come up with such a played out plan. At least not in the 90s. Maybe in the days of the great milk price hike though. It was a joke, I know they're from different companies. Lower your pitchforks. Number 7, last movie for now, I promise. Then we're on to the full comic book zaniness, but we have to talk about Catwoman, the Halle Berry one. People often get caught up in the Halle Berry as Catwoman, or the terrible CG, or the costume trying so hard to be sexy it does a 180 and just becomes sad. But what is often skipped over is the plot. So this film involves an evil cosmetics company whose product will eventually destroy the faces of the women who use it, while also hardening them into stone. This is actually a classic story storyline. We've been here before. However, when you make it the focal point of a 2004 movie, people start to poke holes in it. Lauren Hadari, played by Sharon Stone, is the wife of the CEO of the beauty company, and she just becomes obsessed. She kills patients. Halle Berry is not playing Selena Kyle in this movie. She kills her own husband and goes to great lengths to keep this a secret. They need to release this product and keep it going. However, here's the thing. This is an untenable plan. People are going to use this product and then the word will get out. Are you going to kill every single person who uses it? No. So essentially the fight is Catwoman trying to stop people from having to file a civil suit. A class action lawsuit, actually. This movie is actually really fun if you accept it on its own terms. It's not good, but that doesn't mean you can't have a good time. Number 6. Scarecrow makes everyone illiterate. So the DCEU, that being the DC Animated Universe, had a series of tie-in Batman comics. 2 series actually. And this plot comes from those pages. And it takes the heroes a while to figure out that it's actually a Scarecrow plot, because in all fairness, it doesn't match his usual MO, at least not until you really think about it. So in this story, nobody can read anything anymore. They can't read signs, books, nothing, and society just instantly collapses. Train conductors can't run trains, people can't follow road signs, pandemonium. The thing with this plan is that it takes a very loose look at illiteracy, like people can't understand symbols of any kind or things that were color-coded. Nothing. It's just a bit of a stretch. They can't even take money out of an ATM. All they're seeing is bizarre symbols. People are dying. They call it the illiteracy disease. This story was 2 parts. On the second cover it has Robin cowering in fear of road signs. The thing with this one is, well, it's just not accurately labeled. It makes for a fun story, but you really have to suspend your disbelief, which I'm 100% willing to do. Way to go outside the box, Scarecrow. That's good thinking.
Moving on to number 5, Ink. Our next Baffling character is a Marvel creation who first appeared in Young X-Men issue 1 from 2008, and his powers are his tattoos. Yes, no joke, this fellow, whose real name is Eric Gitter, gets all of his abilities from his tattoos, his body ink, and has no actual superpowers of his own. Ink has access to a mutant tattoo artist who gave superpowers to individuals via his iconic power symbols that he would tattoo onto their skin. Now, Ink's tattoos consist of a biohazard symbol to make his foes extremely sick, a symbol that allows him to heal others, one that gives him super strength, wings on his back that grant him flight, a nuclear symbol in case he, wants to create a deadly nuclear explosion, a red cross on his neck that gives him self-healing powers, lightning bolts on his temples that lets him read minds, and 2 explosive symbols that allow him to blow up objects and punch through walls. But here's the real kicker, my friends. That tattoo artist, the mutant one, the one with the real abilities, he went into a catatonic state after giving Ink his last tattoo, which was the symbol for the Phoenix Force around his eye. All in all, Ink just kinda sucks. Can't really do anything, and he's just riffing off of this poor mutant tattoo artist, who he then put into a coma. So, yeah. Screw you, Ink.
Number 4, the Silver Agent. Astro City. That's right, Astro City time. I love Astro City and we don't talk about it enough. I will make all of the reaches to get characters on it on this list. So Astro City parallels the different eras in the mainstream superhero development, like actually historically. So the Silver Agent is their big Silver Age patriotic hero. And okay, so Astro City isn't told in order. Instead, it jumps around to different tales from Astro City's history. So the Silver Agent's tales revealed in bits and pieces. So at the start, we know that he was a hero and that the city has a monument to him, as what happened to him is their greatest shame. So the Silver Agent story involves time travel, and he is traveling back through his own timeline, and each time he gets a little bit more powerful. So to the city he appears magical and to just be ever increasing in strength, but really he is being charged by the time travel energy as he moves back and forward further and further. He gains super strength, flight, and more, and with his heroic nature he couldn't not jump in to stop situations he saw unfolding. However, the Silver Agent actually gifted his energy to the city when he returned to be executed for a crime he didn't commit, something only revealed after his death, hence their great shame. Astro City is just a ride. Like how the Samaritan has fought his enemy the Infernal to such a standstill that they just go to dinner once a year to see if either is close to coming over to the other side. I could talk about this all day.
Moving on to number 3, the Negative Man. The Negative Man is a character that first debuted in 1963, a DC creation who has eluded fans for years. I mean, it kinda makes sense as to why he's a member of the Doom Patrol. Negative Man, aka Larry Traynor, is an individual who was accidentally exposed to a radioactive field in the atmosphere while piloting a test plane. This gave him an interesting set of powers. Not only was he now radioactive, but he had the ability to release negatively charged energy from his body, referred to as the negative spirit or his soul self. Now this soul self is intangible, capable of flight, it can generate minor explosions when it comes into contact with positive energy, and it also acts as a means of temporal astral projection. It's visually represented as a shadowy silhouette of a human being. The downside? Well, Larry's body is physically defenseless when he is separated from it, so he only uses this ability 60 seconds at a time in order to avoid risking death. Now, because of his radioactive nature, he wears special bandages that protect those around him, making him look a whole hell of a lot like the Invisible Man, something that can be slightly confusing to those unfamiliar with his character or the Doom Patrol upon first glance. And that, my friends, is exactly why he ends up on this list.
Number 2. Pure Heart. This is Archie Andrews, from that time when Archie was a superhero. Archie comics do what they want, and in 2019 they brought this series back again. So when Archie is Pure Heart, his powers depend on his pH factor, or his pure heart factor, so he can only access his powers if he has a pure heart, hence his name, Pure Heart the Powerful. Here's the thing, he can lose his powers really easily, just one impure thought. So feeling jealous, boom, powerless. Accept a gift or kiss from a grateful rescuee, boom, no powers. I hope they don't do it mid-flight, cause then, well, they're both dead.
And finally, in our number 1 spot, Phantom X. First appearing in New X-Men issue 128 from 2000, Phantom X was a character created by the Weapon Plus program to act as a super sentinel against mutants. He's a very convoluted, complex character. So, Mutant Plus does this. They use a process that uses techno-organic organisms whose living tissue is then fused with Sentinel nanotech on a cellular level. Phantom X is birthed from a woman who underwent that process. His mama went through that and he was raised in a place called the World, a man-made environment for these super sentinels. All in all, it is very absurd and peculiar, as are his powers. His nervous system is referred to as something called EVA. This nervous system can come out of his body, yes, like outside of his physical being, and it develops into a techno-organic flying saucer of sorts that he then has a symbiotic relationship with. When EVA is separated from him and in pain, he feels pain. But when he is attacked or someone or something has inflicted damage onto him, he feels nothing, no pain at all, and can ignore those injuries. Phantom X can also see through Eva's point of view, and can control her movement and reshape her form, or body if you will, if he concentrates enough. If that wasn't perplexing enough, Phantom X has microtechnology laced into his blood, which have some eerie effects, prohibiting him from things like believing in anything greater than himself, like gods or supernatural beings or the concept of love. He also can't see colors, which, I mean, in comparison to all the other stuff, is probably not that big of a deal. Dogs can't see colors, so. He can self-heal, and he can alter his body to increase his strength or hearing range. He can also enter a trance in order to perform crucial tasks, such as perform surgery on his own body. All in all, he is a curious character to say the least, and to not entirely understand what he does, I mean, in my opinion, is perfectly acceptable. And at 10, he can create more Hulks. No, we are not talking about procreation here, friends. Hulk's blood has the ability to not only heal others, but to turn them into Hulk monsters as well. Case in point, Bruce Banner's cousin Jennifer Walters. Jennifer became She-Hulk after Bruce gave her a blood transfusion, something that neither had anticipated. She had been shot by an enemy of her father's, who is the LA County Sheriff, and luckily, Bruce was in town and had the same blood type as her. His radioactive blood mixed with her anger over the situation would transform her into She-Hulk, but her powers were a more reduced version of Bruce's, and she could eventually control her transformations too. Now, the only hang up with this ability of the Hulks is that in order for it to successfully work, the other individual needs to have DNA that is a close match to Bruce Banner's, meaning it's only really gonna work for relatives, but still cool nonetheless. Up next at 9, Power Source. The Hulk's body is always creating and radiating gamma energy, which makes him like a walking gamma battery, as noted in the Incredible Hulk issue 103 from Volume 1. Now, on several occasions, the radiation within the Hulk's body has been used as an energy source. While that sounds really neat, it can also cause devastating effects, so maybe think twice about asking him to help you charge your phone. In World War Hulk, this occurred when Hulk got so angry that he nearly smashed the planet to smithereens, and in the process, because of how pissed off he was, his body began to emit radiation. Conrad Zzzxx once tried to use the Hulk as a battery for weapons that he wanted to take over the Earth with. Now, the Hulk can force feed large amounts of this gamma radiation to overload machines, or to drain enemies of their own gamma radiation, like he did to the second Red Hulk. The exact extent of how much radiation the Hulk can control at any given time has yet to be determined. In at number 8, he can survive nuclear holocausts. In the one-shot comic book called Hulk: The End, we see Bruce Banner and the Hulk roaming a desolate version of the Earth that has suffered a war that ended due to a violent nuclear holocaust. Hulk and Banner are the last ones remaining alive, all thanks to the Hulk, who is invulnerable enough to survive the fallout. Banner and the Hulk actually despise each other though, and eventually Banner lets himself die, unable to live like that anymore. After Bruce passes on, the Hulk is trapped. If he ever turns back into Banner, he would die as well. It is all very tragic. But the reason why we take you to this depressing timeline is to discuss the fact that the Hulk's invulnerability and endurance allows for him to survive in such harsh environments, to outlive the effects of mass nuclear radiation radiation. He actually grows stronger from more radiation, making exposure to deadly amounts of radiation a beneficial thing for him, although it does tend to drive him insane, but more on that later. And at 7, regeneration. Hulk has the ability to grow new tissue at an exceptionally fast rate, and to regenerate older tissue. He has had one of the fastest regenerative healing factors in the entire Marvel universe, having demonstrated that if he concentrates hard enough, he can grow back parts of his body, like layers and layers of skin in a matter of seconds. Now this can occasionally cause some problems for him. When he fought against Speed Freak, the villain hit him with metal barbs, and the Hulk's skin grew over the barbs, causing it to tear again after the regrowth. It's gotta hurt. Then, in Hulk the End, he was able to regenerate parts of his body that radioactive cockroaches consumed, which also doesn't sound fun. Plus, the angrier he gets, the faster he can regenerate, so kind of a nifty ability to have. And at number 6, resurrection. In Civil War II, the Inhuman Ulysses has a vision of the Hulk killing all of the Avengers. When Bruce Banner, the Hulk's former alter ego, is approached about the situation, he's confronted by members of the Avengers, and Hawkeye in the process kills Banner. But shortly after Civil War II ended, the Hulk had resurrected Banner, as seen in Avengers No Surrender. The comic depicts a whole sequence of all of the times Banner and the Hulk have faced death, intercut with the image of a doorway opening, implying that's how Banner's mind returns after the Hulk's body regenerates once he's been killed off. Does that mean, like, even of old age he'll never really truly die? Or does his mind have to still be, you know, functional and wanting to live? It's a curious question.
Number 5. Endo-Sim Armor. This first debuted in the Superior Iron Man #1 in 2014. So in 2014, Marvel had an event called Axis, which many do not remember too fondly. Cliff notes: Avengers and X-Men versus the Red Skull controlling Xavier and Onslaught. After all of this, Tony's personality was flipped, so now he was Dark Tony. And so he created the Armor Mark 50, a smart liquid metal mesh incorporating symbiote elements. What could go wrong? Also, I can't hear liquid metal without thinking about Terminator 2. It's actually kinda sad. This was a mindless artificial symbiote that was entirely controlled via artificial intelligence, and then cast aside when Tony's personality flipped back. Superior Iron Man was an interesting time. 100% it just existed because of how well Superior Spider-Man had done. But you know, that one had stakes. Shots fired, I'm sorry. I actually have a soft spot for the aesthetic of this armor. Number 4. Magic Venom. Getting real recent now. Magic Venom debuted in Venom Volume 4 number 13 in 2019, and has ties to the War of the Realms event. The one that people on the outside like to make fun of because the lead villain is Malekith, the dark elf from Thor 2: The Dark World. Well, he was from elsewhere first, but that's where many know him from now. And there's been this odd campaign to make Thor 2 relevant again. It's been very interesting. War of the Realms actually starts with him already having conquered all the other realms, so you're stuck in the lamest one. This one, Midgard, Earth. Again, I live here. Give me Alfheim or Valheim, somewhere else. Anyways, everyone has to band together and stop him. In this arc, Eddie and Venom are separated, so he is given a Dreamstone by a dark elf who is hoping to recruit him. The Dreamstone acts as an artificial symbiote, but is a mindless one, and Eddie ultimately uses pieces of the suit to save civilians. Number 3. Spider-Man India. So Spider-Man India was a miniseries that lasted 4 issues in between 2004 and 5, and blended elements of Spider-Man mythos with more mythological elements. The concept was conceived by an Indian director who had met with Stan Lee to discuss creating an Indian superhero. Symbiotes in this universe are demons, fanged, tusked demons who once ruled but were captured in an amulet. When the amulet was found, it turned the host into the Green Goblin. The demon would hop from the Green Goblin to Spider-Man, but be expelled, but before this it is called Venom. The amulet is destroyed, but not Venom. He's always a menace, no matter the Earth. Number 2. The Beyonder. For this version, we have to go to yet another one of Marvel's humor issues. These issues have brought us such gems as What If Black Panther Was White? Now I give you The Beyonder. Just let the pun wash over you. Live in it. Be the pun. This comes to us from the What the ? A self-parodying comic series for silly jokes. Its tagline was, the Marvel mag of mirth and mayhem. The Beyonder is this universe's version of the Beyonder, who gives Spider-Ham a version of the black uniform. But it's not a symbiote. I just want to tell you about the Beyonder. It's fun to say for me, but it's probably not fun for you to listen to. Number 1. Scorn. Scorn first debuted in Carnage number 5 in 2011. So Scorn was created out of a piece of Carnage left in space after Carnage was torn in half by the Sentry, but he got better. The Sentry may be one of the most powerful beings out there, but Carnage has plot armor and sells comics, so take that, Sentry. The pieces are collected to attempt to create prosthetic limbs, so the first thing that the symbiote bonds to is a prosthetic arm. Because of this, Scorn can bond to technology. Now this is an element that some find confusing, and also there are other story elements that make Scorn Scorn a bit convoluted. Things like how Cassidy was alive and had been preserved by Carnage and was repaired by these prosthetics. Again, you can't kill Carnage. Scorn was eventually corrupted by Null, the symbiote god, and started a cult to worship him. She was killed by Carnage after offering herself to him. Absolute carnage. There is so much carnage going on right now.
Number 10. Sonic Flight. Even with Sean Cassidy's accepted superhuman vocal stamina, this ability appears to be an odd one that doesn't really make a ton of sense. Banshee can produce a sonic scream, which he can use as a form of sonar, to injure those he fights with in battle and to shield himself or others, or disorient his enemies. Sure, that makes sense. But he also uses his sonic scream to fly, which would make sense if he were just using the ability to say, fly up to the second story of a building. But he has used this ability to fly longer distances as well, like over the ocean and stuff. However, in order to remain altitude and stay in the air, he has to keep screaming. So wait, how does he breathe? Well, we know he has enhanced vocal stamina, but this still doesn't really explain long trips. The answer is that he uses a winged gliding suit that allows him the time he needs to apparently breathe. However, without his winged gliding suit, his sonic flight powers would be pretty much useless. So yeah, kind of a weird ability. Number 9. Tentacles. Tentacles. Not to say that tentacles are inherently bad, by the way. They aren't, but what they are is kinda random, especially in this case. The tentacles I wanted to talk about here were Callisto's random tentacles. Callisto never really had tentacles until the early 2000s, but where did they come from? After all, she was introduced in the 1980s without them, and they just kinda seemed to appear one day. Mask was to blame for this alteration to Callisto's look, though she still had her famous eye patch at the time. She has never lost that, by the way. Mask gave Callisto tentacles to torment her. After he was defeated once more, she decided to actually keep them instead of be changed back. Not because they were useful, but because she refused to bargain with Mask anymore, so she just decided to accept them. She was like, I'm cool with these tentacles. The super weird thing is, although they were not a mutation of her own, they still disappeared along with her powers during the events of M-Day. Huh? Number 8. Superpower Manipulation. This is one that people can't seem to wrap their heads around because, well, it's just too overpowered, and why Hope Summers isn't utilized in the comics as often as someone of her power level could be, or maybe should be depending on your opinion. Superpower Manipulation is a weird one because it basically isn't a power that has any inherent weaknesses attached to it. You can do whatever you need to with that power. The possibilities are pretty much endless. In giving Hope this power, they created something virtually undefeatable, but when we read comics, the struggle is what we usually most enjoy exploring and reading about. So from a writer and storyteller context, this makes Hope's power a hard one to feature and use in comics, which is why you might notice stories that involve her don't usually focus on her insane power set. Number 7. Unlimited Magics. I feel like people often forget that Illyana Rasputin's real mutant power is teleportation. She's a teleporter. And yet we all get more wrapped up in her magical abilities, her soul sword. Magic actually only has such powerful magical abilities because she was kidnapped by Belasco when she was very little, which is pretty weird. Just because she was tied to Limbo through her teleportation powers, where Limbo is basically a stepping stone for her while teleporting, she now just has unlimited magical power? Huh? Also, that whole story of Belasco kidnapping young Illyana, basically torturing her, and yet admiring and cherishing her as his protege all at the same time is just pretty odd and nonsensical to begin with. Number 6. Flaming Prehensile Tongue. Toad has all sorts of odd abilities, but one of the most bizarre and odd by far is his prehensile tongue. Now, I know what you might be thinking, but Amanda, he's Toad. Sticky prehensile tongue should make sense for any amphibian-based mutants. But what about when we decide to make it flaming? Yeah, I know, right? That's weird. That was an update that Toad's tongue saw in the comics. Why? I guess because it looks cool. But his tongue was already not a super useful power to have, and adding flames, it doesn't really make it any more useful. It does make it look cooler though, I guess.
Do you know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning? The same thing happens to everything else.
And at number 5, Green Lantern's ability to create kryptonite. Green Lantern's ring can do a whole lot of stuff aside from creating light constructs. It can store a whole lot of crap, including a whole planet, which is kind of insane. But that's not the ring's ability that we're focusing on today, despite how silly that may seem to some. In 1999's Superman Man of Tomorrow issue 13, Green Lantern busts out a brand new trick that seems like a Deus Ex Machina of sorts. Superman was on a rampage, and Martian Manhunter was like, yo, I'm gonna use my telepathy to read the formula for kryptonite from Superman's mind. Yes, just keep following me here, friends. Then he sent that formula to Green Lantern Kyle Rayner to duplicate as a means of fighting the Man of Steel. Supes managed to evade the attack, but it still felt a little extra, almost devaluing the rarity of kryptonite as an organic material. I mean, if Green Lanterns can just create it, like, Superman would pretty much be dead if that got into the wrong hands. Just saying. It makes no sense. And at number 4, boom tube creation from Cyborg. For starters, boom tubes are already mildly confusing. Let's begin with that. Boom tubes are an extra-dimensional point-to-point Einstein-Rosen bridge that are typically opened by a mother box and used as a means of transportation primarily by residents of Apocalypse and New Genesis. New God stuff. While often opened by a mother box, there's a handful of heroes out there who are capable of opening themselves, one of which is Cyborg. The New 52 version of Cyborg altered the hero's origin slightly, by having parademons invade Star Labs after Victor was converted into his cybernetic self. After arguing with his father about what he had been transformed into, he then chased down a parademon and saved a woman on the street from it. But in the process, he absorbed something from a parademon, boom tube technology, which allowed him to transport himself or other individuals. All in all, it is an ability that kind of felt like it was tacked on, but hey, not gonna complain. And at number 3, Kryptonian Coma. Talking Superman. Oh, the death of Superman, my absolute favorite story arc ever. That was sarcasm, people, in case you did not pick up on the obvious. Fans of this channel know I have major beef with this arc. Every time it comes up in a video, I go on a tangent about how terrible it was, how it pretty much ruined the concept of death in mainstream comics, and how it was all just a big sham for DC to pull in a bunch of extra dollars. Long story short, and skipping over some of the hilariously bad and nonsensical plot points here, Doomsday comes to Earth. He and Superman engage in what can only be called a punching match to see who can punch harder. They punch each other so hard that they punch each other to death at the same time. And both are believed to be dead, but turns out, surprise, neither is. The problem is, a whole long and painfully tedious story event was drawn out of Superman's death, in which a bunch of dollar store Superman replacements showed up, and a side story where Green Lantern turned homicidal was a thing. He was merely in a Kryptonian coma, which apparently makes it look like he's dead with no pulse, no breathing, the whole shabam. So everyone in the story was like, whoa, Superman, thank God you're not actually dead. You pulled a fast one on us with that power of yours that makes 0 sense, but okay. Perhaps this number is more baffling than confusing, being something that felt so far-fetched rather than a reasonable plot point. It's all about that money grab. Moving on to number 2, quantum tunneling. We're talking the Flash here, friends. Quantum tunneling is just a fancy name for phasing. It is the Flash's ability to vibrate at such a high speed and at such a high intensity that he can pass through solid objects. See what I mean about those two things being a factor in like a bunch of his powers? And here's where it gets real fun and bewildering. In the New 52 and Flash issue 3, Flash depicts the ability to transfer his quantum tunneling to objects that he touches. He phases a whole airplane through a bridge. Scientifically, we're not even going to try to explain how that is possible. We just know that he becomes practically invisible, and in order for this to work, he needs to calculate the frequency of his vibrations, or else it could get real messy, like phasing through an object halfway and then, you know, getting dead. It's also a power that has varied amongst different iterations of the Flash, with Barry Allen seemingly having a better grasp over it than Wally West. And finally, in our number 1 spot, the 9 senses of Martian Manhunter. Human beings have 5 senses. Martian Manhunter? Well, he's got 9 of them. Aside from being a concept that is strenuous to comprehend, we can't help but be slightly perplexed by what on Earth, or Mars rather, all of those senses possibly do. It almost seems like a completely made up ability that DC just threw into the character's skill set for the fun of it. So out of the 9, 5 are the human senses that we have, but the extra 4 have never fully been defined in the comics. There is a fan theory that one of his 9 senses is a precognitive one. In Martian Manhunter's early days, the character exhibited precognitive abilities. Regardless, Ja'on's 9 senses tops our list simply because there is no possible way for us to understand them, simply because they've never really been explained to us. And also, humans can probably better sympathize with 5 senses than a whole extra 4 that we don't have. All we can really do is speculate. We know that Martian vision isn't considered to be one of them, and thanks to JLA Year 1 Issue 6, we know that if his eyes were removed, he would still have the other 8 senses, meaning the additional 4 have nothing to do with vision. But thanks to Jack Kirby, there is reason to believe that those 4 senses are chopped up to abilities that he was shown as having in Detective Comics issue 226, in his second appearance ever. Those include telepathy, telekinesis, empathetic precognition, and molecular hypnosis, although those tend to be listed as separate powers of his these days compared to being one of the 9 senses. So all in all, little confusing. Oh boy. In at number 10, vampirism. Vampire Hulk? Yes, that's an actual thing. How the hell did that happen? Well, once upon a time on Earth 1610, Tony Stark's older brother created a clone of the Hulk who was much less interested in eating people and having fatal sexual intercourse with others. Fatal for them, not for him. He's kind of a horn dog and also like super like sexual assaulty. Yeah, he's a bad dude. That's the Ultimate Universe. Now this Hulk though is often referred to as Nerd Hulk, and while he is capable of maintaining his intellect, he's much weaker than the original 1610 Hulk thanks to him having control over his emotions, making him much less brutal and violent in combat, which actually Captain America of this universe is like, that makes him crappier. He's less good. He was eventually rejected from the Ultimates and found himself visiting New York City where he would be attacked by vampires, becoming one of them. Gotta love comics. He tried to bite and convert the Avengers yet failed and ended up taking over the group when he decided to undermine and kill their current leader. He ended up dying when exposed to sunlight, with Captain America letting him burn alive for a bit before ultimately decapitating him. Speaking of death, that brings us to our next number. In at number 9, he's undead. On Earth 9602 that is. So on that Earth, the Hulk is an undead creature. This is Skulk. He is the amalgamation of the Hulk and Solomon Grundy, and yes, he is undead. After an experiment with radiation went horribly wrong for Bruce Banner, he fused with the elemental entity of Solomon Grundy from the DC universe. This is the amalgam universe that we were talking about after all. This gave him the combined strength of the Hulk and all of the Hulk's abilities, along with Grundy's, whose exact nature of powers are unknown. Grundy himself is a reanimated corpse, mystically connected to the swamp where he died, and he was reborn. Every time he dies, that swamp gives him a new life, which must come in handy, but you're also an undead, like, reanimated living corpse, so I don't know if it's a good trade-off. Pretty good not being a corpse, although I've never been a corpse, so I wouldn't know if it's a bad thing. Just saying. In at number 8, willful transformation. The Hulk of Earth 928 has the ability to transform at will, which comes in handy. This Hulk, known as Hulk 2099, looks way more like a dinosaur than the traditional Hulk. With razor-sharp claws and fangs capable of tearing through steel, he's everything that the 616 Hulk is, but more vicious and more controlled. He was transformed by a gamma device used on him by the Knights of Banner cult, a group who worshipped the 20th century Hulk. This weapon of theirs was developed after they began experiments with gamma radiation in hopes of creating a new Hulk. And they got their wish when John Eisenhart, a movie studio exec, approached them in hopes of securing the rights to their story. When they said no, he reported their gamma experiments to authorities, who then slaughtered the cult, but then during the crossfire he was hit by that gamma weapon and became the Hulk. In at 7, he's a cannibal. Okay, sure, cannibalism is not a power. If anything, it's just a sickly scare tactic this Hulk uses in battle, but it is still a facet of the Ultimate Universe character that confuses some, so we've added it to our list. You can call it a power if you want. It's kinda weird if you do. Now for starters, the first time the Ultimate version of Bruce Banner transformed into the Hulk, it was a one-time thing. When he's later asked to work towards creating a new super soldier formula, he gets frustrated and ends up transforming himself when he injects himself with it to test. This transformation becomes permanent this time, and he would later confess that the honest-to-God truth of the matter was that he just missed being big. But this form has clearly impacted his psyche because he is a major He's such a threat that he needs to be locked up and is used as a weapon of last resort, with Cap getting the permission to traumatize Banner in order to get him to attack and act out against their enemies. He ends up eating a Chitauri agent, and in the Ultimate Wolverine vs. the Hulk issue 2, Hulk ends up devouring a bunch of co-workers on a farm after they make fun of Bruce Banner's decision to be vegan, along with questioning his sexuality, something that the Hulk seems to be very sensitive about in this universe. It triggers him into violence on multiple occasions. He even yells out "Hulk straight" at one point, so maybe he's a little gay. Moving on to number 6, Lizard Powers. On Earth 19919, we got to witness what the amalgamation of the Hulk and Spider-Man foe, Lizard, would look like. Known more commonly as Lizard Hulk, apt. This version of Bruce Banner has been infected with the spider virus in Spider Island issue 1, when the Spider Queen took over Manhattan. Lots of spiders. In order to rewrite the spider's DNA and remove the Spider Queen's control, Hulk and other heroes went under procedures to alter themselves. Now for Hulk, this was being injected by the Lizard's serum, which transformed him into the lizard-esque version of himself. It also gave him the abilities that Curtis Connors of Earth 616 has, including wall crawling, a faster regenerative healing factor, a tail that he can detach and then regrow, fangs and claws, and lastly, the ability to telepathically communicate and control forms of reptilian life within a 2-mile distance.
Number 5. eggs. There's a few occurrences of this with mutants. Angel Salvador has this ability due to her insect physiology. It doesn't really do much as a power for her, it's just part of the way that she reproduces. Though it is pretty creepy and a little gross. But then again, so is most stuff involving the creation of new life, am I right? One of the other now remarkably famous mutants who have had this weird ability? Gold Balls, who now actually goes by the name Egg. He actually changed his code name due to the revelation regarding his powers. Originally, we just thought Gold Balls emitted gold bouncy balls out of his body, which seemed pretty odd and well, kinda useless. But then we realized in the events of Dawn of X that these gold balls were actually infertile eggs, which is also kinda useless. Unless, that is, you have the other 4 insanely powerful members of the mutant group known as the Five around you. When matched up with Elixir, Tempest, Hope Summers, and Proteus, Egg's abilities revealed themselves as being mighty useful, as together the 5 can combine their power sets in order to resurrect any of their fallen comrades. Still weird, but also kinda now amazing? Number 4. Aviation. The power of aviation through non-telekinetic means, that is. Most mutants that can naturally fly usually have this power as a result of a physical mutation. Some are simply granted wings, like Angel or Pixie, who otherwise find themselves looking like a standard human exteriorly, but some find themselves with a full-on bird-like mutation, like Beak. Beak's aviation mutation, depending on the artist, can leave him looking pretty all-out freaky. He's either drawn like a full-on bird person, or sometimes like a hybrid bird-human. His aviation mutation barely even gives him flight abilities as well. He isn't great at flying, but he can manage to do it for very short distances if he really tries. So why does he look like a bird then? It's not really useful. Number 3. Hollow Bones. Speaking of flight-related mutations, one common trait that you'll see presented as a power or a perk is hollow bones. Angel and Beak both have hollow bones. What it's supposed to help with in regards to those mutants is help them accomplish the ability to fly. And I mean, usually it does by making them significantly lighter, but also hollow bones sound like something terrible to have in the midst of a battle. Somehow Angel has been presented as being very durable, despite the fact that his hollow bones have to exist in order for his flight powers to work and make sense. But if his bones are hollow, then shouldn't punches from foes with super strength cripple the poor original X-Men team member? Like what?
My only regret is that I have bonitis.
Number 2. Become Ice Cream. So far we've only seen this very specific mutant power once, and only in one single issue, and not even an issue of X-Men either, but instead Obnoxio, the Clown's own series. One issue series. The mutant who possessed this ability? Ice Cream. Yeah, I'm not kidding. I know, a very original name. Ice Cream. Ice Cream used his abilities to infiltrate the X-Mansion, planning to put an end to the super team because their abilities made him feel ridiculous by comparison. I mean, I don't blame him. How he expected to accomplish this, however, with his power set being so useless, well, I have no idea. Number 1. Love Eyes. In all new Dupe, we gotta learn even more about Dupe's capabilities. Well, we don't really know what Dupe is still exactly. He has been a member of the X-Men, and hasn't been confirmed either way in regards to his mutant status, or, well, any other status for that matter. We don't know if he's an alien, or if he was made in a lab, or what's really going on with him. None of it's really fully been confirmed. What we do know is that he has a slew of insanely powerful and ridiculously cartoonish abilities. One such ability is Love Eyes, which seems to have no real specific purpose. Kitty Pryde suspected that he was using his love eyes to try and enchant her, casting a love spell on her, but Dupe claimed that they're just how he shows affection. Ineffective love spell or just a weird quirk. Either way, they're pretty irrational. Thank you so much.
Starting us off in at number 10, Crystal. Crystal is a character associated with a ton of different groups in the Marvel Universe. She is the Inhuman Princess, yet throughout her history she has appeared associated with different groups, the likes of the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, and to a lesser extent, the X-Men. She was exposed to the Terrigen Mist and gained psionic control over the elements of earth, fire, air, and water, and other natural materials by extension, which kind of makes her powers slightly confusing. All in all though, she is a character who has a whole lot going on, and has a history that is perplexing at best. She first appeared in Fantastic Fantastic Four issue 45 in 1965, appearing alongside the Inhuman royal family. She fell hard for the Human Torch Johnny Storm, and briefly joined the Fantastic Four team because of this. She was written out of the team though in Fantastic Four issue 105 after Jack Kirby departed from the title. Then she had a stint where she fell for Quicksilver, whom she had a daughter with named Luna. Then she rejoined the Fantastic Four, left again a year after that, and then in 1991 became an Avenger. Hope you guys are following. That stint lasted for a handful of years until 1998 when she returned to Atalan, making guest appearances in various stories for years to come. Eventually, in her timeline, we hit the all-new, all-different Marvel, where she led her own team of Inhumans and got a brand new look which consisted of a pixie cut, and looked very different than her previous depictions. Overall, Crystal seems like she was birthed from a promising idea, but never really managed to find a place in the comics for decades, hence her constant flux throughout the Marvel Universe. Up next at 9, Rainbow Girl. Rainbow Girl lands on this list thanks to her very confusing powers. We've actually discussed the character on our series of superpowers no one understands, which you should definitely check out in case you haven't already. Rainbow Girl is an extraterrestrial character from the planet of Zolnar. A metahuman, her abilities consist of wielding the powers of the mysterious emotional spectrum, resulting in unpredictable mood swings. In other words, she is an inherently sexist character. But it gets worse. So her whole shtick is that she taps into different colors that result in different emotions. Red is anger, blue is hope, green is willpower, which also is a little bit baffling. But she can also create a pheromone field around herself that looks like a rainbow. It gives her an irresistible personality to everyone. Because it's not just looks that matter, it's personality too, right? Right? Jeez, God, DC, could you be any more on the nose? Here's the kicker though. How do these powers work? Well, it turns out even Rainbow Girl has zero clue. According to Jeff Johns, she doesn't fully understand her powers, but rather, she uses them more so for fun. In at number 8, Nebula. Similar to some of the characters we discussed on part 1 of this list, Nebula can often be considered befuddling due to the differences between her comic iteration and her MCU adaptation. Nebula in the MCU is Thanos' adoptive daughter, who suffered from the Mad Titan's onslaught of biomodifications. The version in the comics though is his granddaughter, a fact that Thanos initially refused to accept as truth, and led to the tyrant severely abusing her during the Infinity Gauntlet storyline. Thanos tortured her by having her constantly on the brink of death, never dying but barely living, which Thanos would boast to be his greatest creation. After he had all but won and defeated those who opposed him after his now famous snap that wiped out half of all living things, she would take advantage of the fact that he had expanded his consciousness into the universe, and therefore left his body in a comatose state. So what'd she do? She took the gauntlet from him, and restored herself to her full health, and banished him. Then she decided to use it to try to conquer the universe, which, thanks to her inexperience with it, was a plan that was thwarted by Adam Warlock and company. A year later, she would be converted into a cyborg in the 3rd volume of the Silver Surfer comics, and would return much later in the Annihilation story event that made her fellow pals in the current iteration of the Guardians of the Galaxy popular, the same ones who would then be adapted into the MCU. Full circle! Up next at 7, Raven. DC's Raven is a character who helped revolutionize the Teen Titans, created by Marv Wolfman and George Perez back in 1980. She is a powerful empath who senses emotions and can control something called her soul self, which is essentially an astral body. She is capable of various kinds of magic and sorcery, and has become one of the most prominent members of the Titans over the years. But she's also got a demonic father named Trigon who causes her a whole lot of strife, and constantly thrusts her into narratives where she's turned evil thanks to his influence. Hence the confusion around the character over the years. Remember that time she got hella weird and erotic with Starfire when she interrupted her wedding to Dick Grayson and then disintegrated the priest? Well, technically she interrupted the wedding by disintegrating the priest, but you guys know what I mean. There's a whole lot of that kind of stuff in the comics, but perhaps an even stranger moment in her history was after the New 52 reboot, when DC decided to put her in a Raven costume in which she was called Trigon's Blackbird of Terror. It seems as if Raven is a consistent character up until Trigon makes his frequent appearances in her life and then screws her up all over again, making it hard for readers to keep up. And at number 6, Gwenpool. Who is Gwenpool? Is she a female version of Deadpool? Is she Gwen Stacy as Deadpool? What's her deal? We want to know. Those are the questions that land her a spot on this list. Gwenpool, whose real name is Gwendolyn Poole, Poole spelled with an E at the end, is a character who originated as an amalgamation of Gwen Stacy and Deadpool on a variant cover of Deadpool's Secret Wars issue 2. This occurred thanks to the increasing popularity of Spider-Gwen at the time. Now eventually, seeing the popularity the character on the variant cover had, Marvel created 2 stories featuring her, one of which was a backup story in a Howard the Duck comic. Here, a retcon occurred. Her name was revealed to be Gwenpool, And in her following solo series, it was revealed that she was a character who had come from another universe in which she was privy to the comic book characters and all of the heroes and villains of the Marvel Universe. She claims that she is from the real world, like our world, and unwilling to be an extra in these stories. After arriving in the Marvel Universe, she got her own costume made. The tailor misunderstood her request based off of her name, which he believed was misspelt, thinking that she wanted a costume similar to Deadpool's, thus creating her a Deadpool-esque outfit. Apparently he also had a surplus of pink material, and Gwen had pink highlights in her hair, hence why he made it into a pink costume. So there you have it, friends. Gwenpool has no relation to Deadpool whatsoever, minus appearing on a variant cover. And also having someone mistaken her name.
Number 5, the Psycho Pirate. That's right, the Psycho Pirate is getting airtime, just like the Clock King. Reppin' the B Squad, or rather, the D Squad. Harsh, some people are gonna be so mad, they're like, how dare you, they're the A Squad. We're gonna be talking about the second Psycho Pirate, Roger Hayden, who first debuted in Showcase number 56 in 1965. The Psycho Pirate played a pivotal role in Crisis on Infinite Earths, and Animal Man after, as well as some minor appearances here and there, thanks to him being the only one to remember the universes as it was before the Crisis. But in the modern era, i.e. Rebirth and beyond, he has played a more average role. So the Psycho Pirate uses his Medusa mask to project emotions at people, in a form of offense-based empathy. He can also intensify emotions people are already feeling. Even if they're just little kernels of, say, hate or jealousy, he can fan them into full-blown flames. For a time in the 90s, he was a psychic vampire feeding off the energy of others. And finally, post-New 52, he is a psychic who can manipulate people's emotions, so essentially the same deal, but no need for a magic mask. Just psychic powers, far more plausible. Except scratch that, he still wears the mask, it just now boosts his latent abilities. I swear sometimes the New 52 just change things to change things. Number 4, the Blob. The Blob first debuted in the X-Men number 3 back in 1964, so he's a classic villain. Now at first glance some of you may be like, I got this. Huge mass, so he's dense and hard to hurt, but it goes beyond that. He has elastic skin that is harder to penetrate, though it's not impossible, and he is resistant to projectiles like guns, and in some extreme cases has even bounced small missiles off of himself. An ability that doesn't get a lot of airtime though is his ability to manipulate his personal monodirectional gravity field, which can make him pretty much immovable, and the only person who's moved him when he's like this is the Hulk, and by that I mean like outright lift. Other people have found other ways, they've levied pulleys, levers, physics. He's also actually very fast and agile, so don't judge a book by its cover. His powers were gone, but they're back now, so don't worry about it. Number 3, Parallax, or as I like to call him, the we need to make Hal Jordan sympathetic again plot device. So Parallax first appeared as Hal Jordan in Green Lantern Volume 3 number 50 in 1994. This was Hal's evil persona after he snapped after the destruction of Coast City and killed the Core, snapped Sinestro's neck, the whole thing. Sinestro got better, by the way. However, when Hal Jordan was brought back to life, Parallax was revamped to be an evil entity, the manifestation of the yellow fear and purity. This was what initially had caused Lanterns, Green Lanterns, to have the vulnerability to the color yellow. This way, it wasn't Hal's fault, he was possessed. So the Parallax entity, aside from being able to possess a host and amplify their desire to cause fear, can also cast fear. Parallax can create both green and yellow objects or creatures. It is also made of pure energy. Parallax also has been shown to be able to be forced out of the person it is attempting to possess, if that person has enough will or is sociopathic enough to just not feel fear. Number 2, Ruby Thursday. She's on here because her very appearance just raises so many questions. How does she live? So Ruby's head has been replaced with a mass of organic circuitry that manifests as a red sphere. She first appeared in the Defenders number 32 back in 1976, and she can shape this head into various shapes and manifest tentacles, fire projectiles, create energy blasts, and get this, she doesn't even need the head to be attached to live. It can be over there and still control her body. The fact that she lives at all is amazing to me. Really, people just enjoy the visual of this character. Well, some people. Others think it's silly or at worst sexist. I fall in the silly category, but if I'll suspend my disbelief for so many other things, I'll do it for a computer head. And number 1, Proteus. I feel like Proteus earns the number 1 spot in most lists he's on just from the sheer terror factor. He's too powerful. Proteus first went by the name Mutant X and debuted in Uncanny X-Men number 125 in 1979. The son of longtime X-Men ally Moira McTaggart, his powers manifested from a young age, and so she locked him away for his own safety and also that of others. More so than that of others, to be honest. Proteus is a being of pure energy who hops from host to host and uses up their bodies in the process. Even though he doesn't have to, he could leave beforehand, but he doesn't. His psionic abilities are incredibly powerful and he can alter and warp reality on a grand scale, or just for an individual, like what he did to poor Wolverine, turning him into liquid, and then Cyclops threw coffee on him to snap him out of his trauma. Side note, I like Cyclops, I don't care what anyone says. Proteus also has perfect recall, and on top of all this, he is pretty much immortal as he is made of pure energy. The use of this energy is what burns out the bodies, by the way. All that physics, reality warping, and gravity bending. Oh, he can also possess multiple people at once like Karma and transport interdimensionally. It's a lot. Too much even. I don't want to be warped into liquid. He's dispersed in the astral plane right now, but I don't trust it. He'll be back.